Chapter 679. Just keep him. It's not a big deal. Lu Xiaoyi didn't have any panacea for him. If he didn't experience pain once, he wouldn't learn his lesson. I want the most detailed information about the Green Vine Chamber of Commerce, no matter how big or small it is. Get it done quickly! Although they were all Gold Core Realm cultivators, their statuses in the sequence of Mount E could not be mentioned in the same breath. The difference was like the difference between heaven and earth. This was a cruel fact. Therefore, even though the three of them wished they could be twice as old as him, they could only accept his teachings obediently, not daring to have any doubts. He looked at the peach tree again. What a pity! The people around him were very restrained. He didn't like it, but he couldn't control it. Looking at Fatty Dao He's fawning eyes, he couldn't help but ask, I think this girl is quite talented. Why don't you reconsider? Fatty He's heart was beating like a drum. He didn't know what to do. Although he had formed his dan for a long time, this was the first time he saw a real Xianyuan swordsman in action. His intuition about the ability of Xianyuan swordsmen was mainly based on these resident swordsmen. He could observe them in action. To be honest, he didn't think much of it. Knowing someone by reputation was not as good as meeting them in person. There were too many deceivers in the cultivation world. If one did not meet them in person, one would not be convinced. Therefore, he still had some doubts about the ability of the real Xianyuan swordsmen. They were definitely stronger than those who stayed in the exile, but how much stronger could they be? The battle this time had truly broadened his horizons. Just one strike. He didn't even see the trace of the sword before it hit. This speed was too terrifying. The most shocking thing was that all the cultivators in the universe knew that the real backbone of Xianyuan was the inner sword. If the outer sword was already so powerful, how powerful would the inner swordsman be? It was unimaginable. On one side was the ability to crush and completely control life and death. On the other side was the persistence of the business for hundreds of years. It was really difficult for him to choose. He hadn't sweated for hundreds of years, but now he felt that his forehead was slightly wet. He clenched his teeth and said with difficulty, The Heavens Performance Instrument has determined that this woman is not qualified. This is the business principle of the Green Vine Chamber of Commerce. This old man has limited power, so I can't act on my own. I can only report to the Chamber of Commerce and let the big shots decide. This loan is too large. Even our Green Vine Merchant Guild can't afford to suffer too much loss. Otherwise, the entire guild will be in trouble. We have thousands of shops and tens of thousands of employees. Lu Xiaoyi sneered. If you refuse, then just refuse. What's the point of saying so much? Green Vine has 1 million men, it's none of my business. He then smiled and looked at Huang Xiaoya. Xiaoya, where did your aunt go? Can you tell me now? She knew that this person would definitely ask her again, so how should she answer? This guy wasn't a foundation establishment cultivator, but rather Jean Dan. And it was the elite Jean Dan of the Holy Lands Mount E. He was a person who had the authority to make decisions for the disciples under him. He was a true expert who could move the wind and clouds with his sword. They were the enforcers of discipline in the land of exile. Inspecting discipline? Shouldn't they be upright first? What right did this guy, who was always thinking about other people's ants, have to inspect discipline? Could it be that only perverted people could use perverted swords? Huang Xiaoya didn't dare to question him out loud. She only secretly made up her mind that one day, the heavens would pity her and let her go to Mount E. She would definitely report him and make him suffer. But now, she still had to make a choice. I don't know. This was a laughable insistence, because it was meaningless. She knew very well that with this person's status as an envoy inspector, if he asked her grandfather, he would definitely reveal her aunt's whereabouts without hesitation. At the same time, he would also say, What do you think of my Huang family making another granddaughter's bed? Lu Xiaoyi sighed again. They all had a Dao heart. For the sake of business, for the sake of family, they would rather die than submit. They were all fearless. The sword could cut people, but it couldn't cut the heart. His interest waning, he said to Huang Ju, "I'm going to the city to relax. Once I've gathered the information on the Green Vine Company, I'll send it over immediately." The three Jean Dan were very fast. That night, Huang Ju found the envoy inspector drinking at Chui Chui restaurant and handed him a jade scroll. "Envoy, do you need us to use our local forces to investigate this Green Vine Company?" Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. "This is not your duty. If you do it too obviously, it will be a bad thing. Just forget about this matter." Huang Ju was a little hesitant. Lu Xiaoyi understood his thoughts and comforted him. "Don't worry, it's not a big deal. It has nothing to do with your survival here. Also, I think that little girl of yours is not bad. Send her to Mount E. Tell her that I said I would allow her to pass as an exception." The envoy inspector always had some privileges. For example, he could bring someone along. It was better to be in charge than to be in charge, so why not use this privilege? If there were too many people, it would go against the sex principles. However, one or two was not a problem. As for Auntie Narcissus, she was just a memory in his life. Cultivators placed the most importance on fate. If one was too deliberate, they would lose the upper hand. He was also not a person who liked to disturb the normal lives of others. After studying the information on the Green Vine Chamber of Commerce, he couldn't find anything. He only knew that this Chamber of Commerce was very old, with tens of thousands of years of history. The owner had long been unknown. Based on the current structure, it was a union of dozens of large merchants. Whenever a new business force appeared, they would adopt a method of integration. They relied on this method to maintain the strength of the Green Vine Chamber of Commerce. As for whether there were people with ulterior motives, it was very troublesome to investigate in detail. Just from this kind of behavior, it was not possible to determine whether they had good or bad intentions. It would be normal if it was the Blue Sky sect that sent the seeds of fate to the main world for free. However, if it was the land of exile, it was very abnormal. What were they planning? If one were to link the people of the grassland with the land of exile, there must be a lot of bad intentions. Could it be that there was a group of people who were silently, without complaints, and were willing to waste resources to support Xian Yuan? Was it possible? He was sure that people at the level of Fatty he were not involved. Otherwise, he would not have rejected him in the Huang mansion. If they wanted to scheme in the dark, they must be laughing on the surface. This was a matter of two sides of the same coin. There must be someone at a higher level behind the scenes. What was their purpose? Was it the sect Xian Yuan? Or the Blue Sky sect? Or the entire Five Rings bandit group? Although there was no concrete evidence yet, Lu Xiaoyi felt that he could not hide it for too long. His personal strength was powerless in the face of such a huge conspiracy. The strange fate of Sand Planet, Blue Beard of Whirling Planet, the grassland of Blue Sky, and the land of exile. He vaguely felt that this was a big conspiracy against the Five Rings bandit group. This was the biggest possibility. As for why such fate appeared in Blue Sky, the reason was actually very simple. The core of the Five Rings bandit group was the three great masters, the three pure ones, and Xian Yuan. Two of the three great masters, the three pure ones and Xian Yuan, were from Blue Sky. If they did not come here, where would they come from? Chapter 680. Lu Xiaoyi decided to let nature take its course. He would investigate the Green Vine Chamber of Commerce to the best of his ability in the exile for several years to strengthen the persuasiveness of his future statements. Then, no matter the result or not, he would tell Nanjunren everything after returning to the Blue Sky sect, except for the question about fate. This was the biggest difficulty. In fact, if he didn't care about fate, he didn't know how to talk to the higher-ups about his feelings. Could he just rely on his sixth sense? He needed to think of a good excuse, a good way, and a good starting point to reveal everything that happened in the Five Rings and Blue Sky. If it really didn't work, he wouldn't hesitate to expose his own fate. This was a great sublimation of his state of mind. He already regarded Xian Yuan as his home, the Blue Sky Mountain as his ancestral home, and the Five Rings as his handsome horse that roamed the universe, most importantly, he didn't think anything would happen to him if he lost his fate. He had the stars. He had the 5 elements. There would be more and more of these things in the future. So what if he didn't have the fate in his mind? Wouldn't it be him? Wouldn't it be invincible? Wouldn't it be able to beat the heroes? Everything had to go with the flow. He had to make the right decision at the right time. It couldn't be said that he was just wasting time and opportunities before. No one was an immortal, and it was impossible to know the heaven and earth. He had to find the abnormalities and patterns in the scattered events that happened continuously before he could make a judgment. Then, now that he had made a basic judgment, he only needed to investigate the Green Vine Chamber of Commerce. This wouldn't take much time, just a few years. He could feel that the conspiracy about fate had been going on for hundreds of years, and it might continue for a long time in the future. To move against a domain like the 5 Rings blue sky, it wasn't something that could be decided and set off on a whim. This required a long time to prepare, at least hundreds of years, and possibly thousands of years. Then, in order to better convince the elders, he naturally needed more evidence. Without the fate, it would be difficult for others to understand his feelings. How to make them believe him was a problem. If he was a half-immortal, all of this wouldn't be a problem, but he was just a small Jean Dan, and a newcomer who hadn't even formed his gold core for 100 years. Who would believe that he could predict a crisis that affected the universe? His hair wasn't even fully grown, and he hadn't even gone out alone in the universe. This kind of situation really made people feel helpless. If he wanted to investigate the Green Vine Merchant Guild, he would inevitably need to follow them, investigate them, and spy on them. There were countless members in the Green Vine Merchant Guild. How could he find the key people and clues? It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Moreover, this was very contradictory to his cultivation plan. At a time like this, he did not choose to focus on his personal cultivation. Instead, he chose to consider the big picture. At this moment, he had truly matured into a qualified Xianyuan swordsman. And growth came at a price. Over the past year, he had become familiar with the details of the Green Vine Chamber of Commerce. He also had a general understanding of the position of people like Fatty He in the Chamber of Commerce. It was probably the concept of a professional manager in the future, who was responsible for the operation. The real decision-makers of the Chamber of Commerce were the big bosses standing behind the scenes, including the top families in the exile, the big sects, and even the heaven-defying sect. At this point, he was somewhat unable to continue his investigation. Because what he was about to face was no longer a mere Jean Dan, but more of the high and mighty Yuanian cultivators. In terms of combat strength, he was not afraid of these so-called Yuanian cultivators. What kind of powerful characters could hide in the exile? His state of mind was not good enough. But now, he was investigating and not fighting. In terms of playing mind games, it was difficult for him to compete with those old foxes. A year later, the exhausted Lu Xiaoyu returned to Jinzhou's city once again. He was just passing by, and not because this city had any special meaning. He intended to rest here for a period of time, and then decide whether to follow his original plan of cultivating to the middle stage of Jean Dan before returning to Mount E, or directly return home, and completely push this troublesome matter that involved too much of his energy to the sect. There were so many perfected and perfected cultivators, and each of them was extremely capable and cunning. It did not make sense that the burden of the sect would be placed on the shoulders of a mere Jean Dan. In the evening, he found the most ordinary tavern in the city to drown his sorrows in alcohol. In this past year, his alcohol tolerance had increased. Stress could turn a boy into a man, and it could also turn a normal person into an alcoholic. There were no true alcoholics among the cultivators, because they could not get drunk. However, it had become normal for them to not leave their teapot. That was the way they vented their frustrations after everything went wrong. There were some things that no one could talk about, and no one could listen to. A tall and mighty old man led a cute young lady into the tavern. The two of them came to his table and respectfully bowed to him. The young lady, in particular, bowed to him with the etiquette of a grand master. Huang Ju was not surprised by the difference in the person in front of him compared to a year ago. Unusual people did unusual things, and it was not easy to pry into the private affairs of a capable person. He only did what he was supposed to do. Anva! This child, Xiaoye, has already finished her preparations and is about to set off for Mount E. By chance, she found traces of you in the city, and wanted to ask if you have anything to tell her? Xiaoye is also on the way. Lu Xiaoyi nodded, not knowing what to say. The atmosphere became very awkward. Huang Ju was shrewd and ruthless, and Lu Xiaoyi was absent-minded. Only the bored Huang Xiaoye was looking at this familiar yet unfamiliar person, who was both a villain and a benefactor. He was completely different from before. What exactly had he gone through? He used to be such a sunny young man, a handsome swordsman who could not be distinguished if thrown into the crowd. Now, his beard was unkempt, his hair was messy, his clothes were dusty, and he drank a cup of wine every time. It made people. Of course, she did not know that this was deliberately done by Lu Xiaoyi to disguise himself. Otherwise, if a foundation establishment cultivator could maintain a clean appearance at any time, there was no reason that Jean Dan could not do the same. In the land of exile, who could make him like this? With the sharpness of his sword, he might not even care about those Yuanying ancestors, right? She did not know. She only knew that if this guy came to ask her about her aunt's whereabouts, she would most likely not refuse. She did not know why, but her mood was complicated, so complicated that it hurt a little. The highest realm of chasing a girl was desolate, mysterious, powerful, and melancholy. Desolation could close the gap between the two sides. Mystery could make people want to find out, especially for a girl who was not deeply involved. Strength could make people feel that they could rely on her. Melancholy could stir up the motherly light in the depths of a girl's heart. Huang Xiaoye really wanted to do something for him, but she did not know how to say it. The difference in strength between them was so great that it could be said that it was like heaven and earth. What could she really do? Suddenly, Lu Xiaoyi raised his head and looked at her quietly. Can you do something for me? Huang Xiaoye nodded firmly, as if she was using her life to make a promise. Okay. Chapter 681. He took out a jade slip and solemnly placed it on the table. Lu Xiaoyi did not know why he did this. Was it like he was making arrangements for his funeral? He could choose the more stable Huang Ju, and he could also affirm his loyalty, but he still chose this little girl. That was intuition, an indescribable trust that was deeply rooted in the depths of his heart. From the first time they met, he had this feeling. It was very inexplicable, but now, this feeling was even stronger. Perhaps the trust from his previous life had been transferred to this life? He didn't know. There were too many things about cultivation that he didn't know. He only knew that following his feelings was the right thing to do. Huang Ju had already left. As an experienced cultivator, he knew the rules of the cultivation world very well. Don't listen to things you shouldn't listen to. It would be very rude to ask someone to drive you away. This jade slip records some of my thoughts. It may be very important, or it may not be important. In fact, I don't know either. I'll give it to you now. I hope you can keep it for me. And use it at the right time. You can read it, but you might not be able to understand it. That doesn't matter. When you can use it, you will naturally understand. How to use it? Just give it to any Grand Master you feel close to in Mount E. In the future, leave it to them. Whether they believe it or not, it's not your fault. Huang Xiaoye was confused. She really couldn't understand it now. Why can't I hand it in as soon as I get to Mount E? What's the difference? I'm afraid I'll miss the opportunity. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. I can't hand it in directly. Because it's very likely that I will return to Mount E in a few years. At that time, I will personally say it, not rely on a jade slip. This thing looks like my last words. I don't want you to really use it. Others will laugh at me. That would be too embarrassing. Just like when you were a little girl, if you had a strange ability to predict the arrival of a storm, then what would you do? Huang Xiao was very smart. She somewhat understood. I can't say it too early, because I'm a child. I can't say it too late, because people will lose their chance to escape. I can only wait until the storm forms. The clouds are gathering, the swallows are flying low, and the ants are moving. Only when there are some signs will my words be most likely to be believed. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Look at how smart you are! Even I'm not very sure about the things on the jade slip. If it was something I was certain about, I wouldn't have given it to you. Why don't you go back and say it yourself? This was just a precaution, just in case. While reminding others, he also had to be careful not to make a mistake. You can do it. I believe in you. Huang Xiaoya opened her eyes wide. Is it a big deal? You can't even handle the big ones? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Very big. It might involve more than one universe. You see, I haven't even gone out into the universe, but I'm worried about these things that are completely beyond the scope of my ability. It's very likely that people will think I'm crazy. Huang Xiaoya agreed with his words. Groundless fears? But you really do look like a lunatic. Lu Xiaoyi had long been used to her disregard for status. He liked this way of getting along with her. Cultivate well. Work hard. Protect yourself, protect your family, and protect your sect. The faster you improve, the more you can understand the true meaning of my jade slip, and the better you can judge the time to hand it in. Huang Xiaoya had another question. Why don't you appoint a martial ancestor? Is it because of suspicion? Lu Xiaoyi secretly praised her sharp intuition. Although this little girl looked carefree, when she really put her heart into it, even he couldn't fool her. However, even if he couldn't fool her, he still had to fool her. You don't know, those spiritual masters and true monarchs are all lazy people. What they like the most is to travel the universe. You don't even know who is on the mountain when you want to open your mouth. They have different personalities. Some are carefree, some are cynical, and some are serious and old-fashioned. Different people will make different judgments about the same things. Some will take it to heart, and some will think that this is making a mountain out of a molehill. So I ask you, according to your heart, judge who is close and who is distant. You have the ability to tell whether someone is good or bad at a glance. Huang Xiaoya still muttered. What if the people I feel close to are not here? You have to give me a final choice. Is there no one you can trust in this big MTNI? Lu Xiaoyi laughed. He liked this kind of seriousness. Then go to the Old Man Mountain. Everyone there is worthy of your trust. Huang Xiaoya muttered. Old Man Mountain? They are all old fellows. I hate dealing with old fellows like Grandpa the most. Okay, I will accept it. In the end, I still want to thank you for giving me the chance to go to Blue Sky. Seeing her bow again, Lu Xiaoyi stopped her. You don't need to do this. What I need are companions, not juniors who bow to me for no reason. Huang Xiaoya's eyes lit up. She liked to hear such words the most. In fact, it was normal when she thought about it. Because of the difference in cultivation level, if everything went smoothly, she would definitely form her core before this guy formed his nascent soul. Seeing Lu Xiaoyi drink the last cup of wine and was about to leave, Huang Xiaoya shouted, Hey, don't you want to know about my aunt's news? Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand, laughed, and disappeared into the darkness, disappearing without a trace. However, Huang Xiaoya felt an inexplicable sense of panic in her heart. She didn't know why, but she was more willing to see this fellow's original conduct, not now. She put away the jade slip and went out of the tavern. Looking at her grandfather standing in the distance, she suddenly felt a little reluctant. Her grandfather said that if she couldn't form her core, she wouldn't come back. This was not heartless, but hope. The grandfather and grandson went east. When they finally saw the tall and majestic mountain of the heaven-defying sect, the young Huang Xiaoya couldn't help it. Grandpa, don't you want to know what the envoy entrusted me with? The old man laughed. I don't want to know. You can't know. Because this is your responsibility, as well as your opportunity. Grandpa is old and shouldn't be involved in this. The future is yours. Lu Xiaoyi stood silently on top of a nameless mountain outside Ginku, quietly waiting for the news. Cultivators had intuition. When it reached a certain level, it was called a sudden impulse. Just like him now. Everything was natural. Before he came to Ginku, he didn't feel anything, but after drinking half of the wine, he had some understanding. When he saw Huang Ju and his grandson, he knew what he should leave behind just in case. The heavenly Tao had arranged everything in an orderly manner. He couldn't resist it now. Familiar city, familiar people. One had to face the unknown, the other had to walk towards a new life. Huang Xiaoye would start her path. This was another beginning. He was about to start. Although he didn't know what was waiting for him, but everything was a surprise. And at Huang Xiaoye's level, it was impossible for her to withstand such an accident. She might not even be able to reach the hidden God Mountain with this thing. Therefore, he could only write it as mysterious, all kinds of mysteries, countless mysteries, ambiguities, and specious. This was a form of protection, not because he was petty. Now, what needed to be done had been done. All that was left was to wait. He could feel that it wouldn't be too slow. It would be before daybreak. On the eve of dawn, a message talisman flew through the sky. Lu Xiaoyi received it and scanned it with his divine sense. He smiled coldly. He didn't expect that he was the one who started it. There was an extremely famous place in the land of exile. In its extreme west, there was an intermittent crack in the sky. There were 3 ways for foreign cultivators to come to the land of exile. The first was the wormhole connection between the Old Man Peak of Mount Shao and the Hidden God Mountain's heaven-defying sect. It was now completely controlled by Xianyuan. The second way was for cultivators to locate the land of exile through the antimatter space and come on floating rafts. This required precise positioning, and it was difficult for people who weren't familiar with it to find it. The probability was even lower than finding a needle in a haystack. The last way was the crack in the sky in the extreme west. It connected the universe to infinity. It was a completely naturally formed transmission channel. It was full of uncertainty, and there was a high probability of death when passing through the unstable spatial crack. It was a path of no return, but it was also the shortest way to cross between different universes. To the people of the land of exile, they couldn't stop the Xianyuan people. Qing Kong and the other old Dharma branches probably couldn't stop them because they knew the location of their antimatter space. The only thing they could stop was these guys who came from nowhere from the crack in the sky. The Xianyuan people knew the rules, and so did the Qing Kong people. After more than 10,000 years, the people of the land of exile didn't feel that they were trying to control the land of exile, and their vigilance gradually faded. However, the threat from the crack in the sky was real. This was because the people who came were not organized and didn't form a system. In order to survive, there was nothing they didn't dare to do. Where would the crack appear? It wouldn't appear in a place with stable space. It could only appear in barren mountains and unruly rivers, dangerous places, caves, and other places with complicated and dangerous environments. Those who could go to such places were extremely adventurous. They were the type of cultivators who licked blood from the edge of their blades. Most of them were arrogant, and there were very few who were kind. If such people entered the land of exile and saw that the strength of the cultivators here was limited, it would be strange if they didn't have any ideas. Therefore, it must be strictly guarded. Before the Xianyuan swordsmen entered the land of exile, defending the crack in the sky was the task of the people of the land of exile. However, at that time, the task was carried out by the most powerful heaven-defying sect. They were more organized and coordinated. Nearly 20,000 years ago, after the land of exile was conquered by the Xianyuan, the situation stabilized, and there were no internal conflicts. The entire land of exile was inclined to be united under the pressure of the Xianyuan. Therefore, the task of defending the crack in the sky was not only undertaken by the heaven-defying sect, but also by the forces of the entire land of exile. The heaven-defying sect still had the largest share, but other sects and families couldn't escape. This was everyone's business, including the Blood River sect, Gu Dao, and so on. The one who sent the letter to Lu Xiaoyi was Taoist Qi Shui. After Lu Xiaoyi left last time, he represented the Blood River sect to participate in the decennial task of defending the crack in the sky. It had been 7 or 8 years since then, and they were about to get through it. However, they didn't expect that at the end of the task, there would be a careless mistake. In the area where the Blood River sect and Gu Dao were jointly defending, a group of extraterrestrial visitors broke in. After a fierce battle, most of the intruders were killed, but 2 or 3 of them escaped. This was actually normal in the defense of the crack, and it was difficult to eliminate all of them. For cultivators, escaping was always much easier than killing all of them. This was a tacit secret among all the defenders. Those who escaped were always few in number, and they couldn't cause too much trouble in the land of exile. Gradually, they could only blend in. Those who dared to cause trouble would incur the iron fist of the entire land of exile. However, the few who escaped this time were somewhat different. They were real desperados. After escaping, they didn't leave. Instead, they began to harass and peep at the crack in the sky. This made the defenders immediately realize a problem. Could it be that there were more of them in the crack? Otherwise, it wouldn't be enough to explain why they didn't leave here. Chapter 683. The cultivators in the land of exile immediately realized the risk, so they immediately strengthened the defense of the crack in outer space and doubled the manpower to prevent a possible collapse. However, the principle of the land of exile was that the person who made the mistake had to clean up the mess. Others might help out of friendship, but they could not rely on it. The Blood River sect and the Gu Dao had once had a major conflict with the heaven-defying sect. Since then, the two sects' strength had been greatly reduced, and they had lost their glory. Coupled with Xuanyuan's strength and the heaven-defying sect's secret suppression, they had never recovered to half of their peak. When they encountered strong opponents from outer space, the two sects were unable to cope with them. Thus, they begged Lu Xiaoyi, hoping to borrow his ability to tide over this crisis. Lu Xiaoyi was not the only foreign aid they had invited. In order to tide over this crisis, the Blood River sect and the Gu Dao had not only sent out all their experts, but also used their own connections. He was also lucky enough to be invited. A few days later, Lu Xiaoyi arrived at the extreme west of the land of exile. Here, the astral wind was strong, the spiritual vigor was chaotic, and the stars were dim. If they flew further up, they would reach the void universe, which was a natural moat for golden core cultivators like them. A long strip of dark green space fault that stretched for nearly 10,000 miles appeared in front of him, shocking him. He was a little doubtful. How could such a long crack be completely sealed? There were many cultivators in the sky, evenly distributed around the narrow crack. There were even a few yuanying auras among them. It seemed that the land of exile was serious this time. After sending out the message, Byron came to pick him up. He was a little dispirited, but when he saw Lu Xiaoyi, he was delighted. This was because they knew very well that the real Xianyuan swordsman who came to the azure sky of the autonomous world could be regarded as a yuanying cultivator in terms of combat strength. What a big fuss! But I think everyone is very free, Lu Xiaoyi said with a smile. He did not have many friends in the land of exile. Mo Shui and Bai Jiu could barely be counted as two. Although the two of them were from unorthodox sects, it had nothing to do with their personalities. No matter how fierce and overbearing they were 10,000 years ago, they were no longer the same as before. Ambition was often a byproduct of strength growth. Now that they were suppressed by the heaven-defying sect, they were barely surviving, so they couldn't look forward to the future, let alone be arrogant and domineering. How many cultivators could really be the same forever? Bai Ji sighed. Brother Fei, this is your first time here. Perhaps you don't know the situation here. How could there be enemies coming in every day? If that was the case, wouldn't we be exhausted to death? Under normal circumstances, there would only be a few such occurrences in a year, and they were basically scattered visitors. This was the first time in the last few thousand years that such a group of visitors had appeared. In a spatial rift, it is very difficult for cultivators to stay together. Even if you hold hands, the mystery of space will separate you. In addition, there are countless spatial rifts and branches, so the possibility of appearing at the same destination at the same time is very small. Therefore, the situation this time is a bit strange. Lu Xiaoyu was very puzzled. Although there are many cultivators here, compared to the nearly 10,000 li long spatial rift, it is just a drop in the bucket, right? You are so evenly distributed, don't tell me you don't know the exact location of their appearance? Baiji said bitterly. Exactly. The cracks were all connected to each other in the shape of a maze. There were both exits and entrances everywhere. We were not sure where they were going to come out from. Therefore, we could only station the core formation stage cultivators in different sections, with several nascent soul stage cultivators 100 kilometers behind them as backup. My Gu Dao and Blood River sect were assigned to an area close to 3,000 li near the edge. Now we have gathered more than 100 Jing Dan cultivators, including our own people and invited friends. It is barely enough. I hope the visitors from other regions will not appear in our area, otherwise it will be troublesome. Not only will we suffer losses, but we will also implicate our friends. Why do you think a large number of visitors from other regions will definitely come from the spatial rift? Also, how did you deal with the extraterrestrials that escaped? Baiji said worriedly. When cultivators approach from the spatial rift, they are not completely silent. Their forms and fluctuations of spiritual vigor are always predicted in advance. More than 10,000 years ago, we could only detect their signs when they were about to come out, but after more than 10,000 years of dedicated research, we have discovered some regularity. The time of prediction is much earlier, and we can accurately determine the number of people who pass through the spatial rift. This is the cornerstone of all our judgments. From experience, the creatures inside the space cracks were like a maze with countless exits. In fact, they didn't know which exits led to habitable planets, which led to cultivation planets, and which led to the desolate universe in the nebula. Therefore, we can only take a gamble. You also know that the space cracks appear randomly in various universes, just like how there are only a few planets that are suitable for human cultivation. Most of the exits are in extremely harsh environments in the universe. For cultivators at the level of gold core like us, going out means death. Therefore, whether we can come out or not is a problem. Lu Xiaoyi understood a little. To be honest, he had no theoretical knowledge of space, and his knowledge was very limited. You mean, although we can sense many living beings in the spatial rift, it does not mean that they will come out, because they have to take a gamble. But if the visitors from other regions who came out first stay near the spatial rift, they may provide some kind of directional guidance for the people in the spatial rift. Or a life safety reminder? According to what you said, the living beings in the spatial rift are smuggling in an organized and purposeful way? Baiji nodded bitterly. Yes. In the tens of thousands of years of history of intercepting stowaways in the land of exile, although it is common for individuals to fight by accident, there have also been small groups, and even large groups. There are countless cultivation orthodoxies in the universe, and many of them are orthodoxies that we do not understand. There are inheritances with special skills in space. There are also those who have left their homes due to the war in the universe. There are even dozens or hundreds of people from an entire orthodoxy who wander in space, hoping to find a safe place where they can cultivate and accept them. For such orthodoxies, there must be death warriors who act as the vanguard. They come out first, check out the environment, see if they can cultivate, and see if the natives can accept them. After everything goes well, most of them come out. Basically, this is the routine. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. In the end, they come to this place. At first glance, it looks very safe, and they can cultivate. However, they do not know that the heavenly axiom is flawed, and there is a ceiling. How do we treat these stowaways in the land of exile? Don't tell me we kill everyone that comes, and kill every two that come? Chapter 684. Daoist by Dao was embarrassed. How can that be? Even if the great Tao of the land of exile is flawed, the most basic Tao of cause and effect still needs to be followed. How can we kill at will? But there is a condition here, that is, we can't affect the original cultivation pattern of the land of exile, and we can't take over the place. For the natives who have lived here for generations, it's not too much to ask, is it? Lu Xiaoyi agreed. Not too much. Everyone has the right to protect their homeland. Immigration can bring new blood and new ideas, but it must be limited to a certain range and not beyond. Bai Dao agreed. That's right. So as long as there are stowaways, as long as they don't attack first, and as long as we have time to communicate with them, we will put forward our conditions. For example, they can live and cultivate in the areas designated by us, their rights and obligations, swear that they won't betray the land of exile, abide by the cultivation rules here, and don't allow any force to exist as a whole. They must be separated, and so on. As long as they agree, we can solve the problem peacefully. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. The conditions in the land of exile are harsh enough. I'm afraid ordinary people can't accept them. However, Bai Jin was insistent. Brother Fei, the land of exile is not as good as your main world. You have a big family, a big business, and strong strength. Your orthodoxy stands at the peak of the cultivation world of the universe. Of course, you can show generosity and generosity. Because of your size and strength, you don't ask for anything. Maybe the newcomers will cry and beg to join you. Can the land of exile do it? Due to the sealing of the heavenly Tao, it was rare for a second-rate orthodoxy to have a truly powerful cultivator overseeing it. If the orthodoxy were to open its doors and display its brilliance, the master of the land of exile would have changed many times already. How can people like us live in such a place? Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. It was not easy to survive. Helping others was easy to say, but it was hard to do. How could there be right or wrong? I guess you've killed most of the stowaways, haven't you? At least, I haven't sensed any strange orthodoxies in the land of exile for so many years. Bai Dao sighed. Brother Fei, you're one of us, and we treat you as half the owner of the land of exile. So, there are some things that we won't hide from you. You're right, most of them were killed. After all, how could anyone who could survive in the outer space crack be a weak-minded person? A cowardly person would either go mad or die. They wouldn't be able to make it. Loneliness, death, danger that could appear at any time, companions leaving one after another, not everyone could accept all of this. Relatively speaking, if it were individual stowaways, there was still a possibility of lowering their heads and making concessions. However, if it was a group, especially if it was a large-scale migration of a Tao orthodoxy, then there was no room for compromise. There was no other choice but to fight. Those who didn't stay in their original domain to be bullied and coerced, and dared to break through the spatial rift are all fierce characters. Lu Xiaoyi asked again. Aren't you afraid that a group of perfected and perfected immortals will come out? Bai Zhe laughed. Above Yuanying, spatial abilities are the standard. Things like spatial rifts can't withstand the power of perfected immortals. They want to be trapped by spatial rifts, but they can't. It's the same for powerful Yuanying. They can easily break through the spatial barrier of spatial rifts. As for Yuanying who can be trapped by spatial rifts, needless to say, they're just barely strong. We have several perfected immortals on standby behind us. They're more than enough to deal with them. Let me tell you, would a large sect escape through a spatial rift with an uncertain future? They could use flying boats or floating rafts to escape into the negative space. Wouldn't that be much safer? Those who use such unstable spatial rifts as an escape method are definitely small and medium-sized sects that don't have the ability to float through the universe. They're betting on luck. So, Jin Dan is the one who appears the most here, including this time. Lu Xiaoyi was very puzzled. Since they're all Jin Dan, why can't we catch any of them with so many people here? It's fine if we can't catch them. The land of exile is too big. It's possible to find a place to hide. But to allow them to wander around the spatial rifts and provide possible information, That's a little unreasonable. Bai Zhe was very embarrassed. Well, Brother Fei, you don't know. The first group of stowaways that rushed out were mostly taken care of by us. Only 3 escaped. Later, the Yuanying perfected immortals personally searched and killed 2 more. Only one was unusually cunning. Even the Yuanying perfected immortals couldn't do anything to him. According to the perfected immortals, the last one has a very rare demonic body. It doesn't have a physical body. It's a pure energy soul state. It's a little like a soul cultivator, but not completely the same. Its biggest feature was that it could temporarily possess a cultivator whose mental strength was weaker than it. It could even control the cultivator's actions to a certain extent. Of course, there was a limit to this. It still couldn't completely control the cultivator's actions when it came to some fundamental issues, such as making the cultivator commit suicide. But no matter what, such a special ability has never appeared in the land of exile. Of course, we don't know how to deal with it effectively. Even the Yuanying perfected immortals can't do anything about it. That's because we can't tell which cultivator this thing is possessing. Lu Xiaoyi was a little cautious. You suspect that this thing might not have gone far? That it's possessing the cultivators guarding the spatial rifts? Because to it, the more human cultivators there are, the easier it is to hide? Taoist Qi Shui came from afar and replied. That's true. This is the real reason why we invited you here, Brother Fei. It's not a simple matter of fighting to the death. There are so many of us. If we can do it ourselves, why bother a friend? There's really no other way. Among the cultivators staying near the spatial rifts, only the Yuanying perfected immortals have strong mental strength and can't be possessed. The others are all in danger. That includes me and Bai Zhe. We don't know who's normal and who's possessed by the demonic body. Hundreds of Jin Dan cultivators don't trust each other because of this piece of rat **T. Look, they're all scattered. They're worried that their friends from the same sect will suddenly turn hostile and kill them. Lu Xiaoyi understood. You invited me here because you want me to investigate? Qi Shui nodded, then shook his head. We're not the only ones who invited you here. Actually, the heaven-defying sect is also looking for people outside, especially those cultivators with strong mental strength. They can make a move at any time when the demonic body is in action. Our Blood River sect and Gu Dao's connections are limited. Those so-called orthodox sects also look down on us. Our friends from the same sect are similar to us. If they come, it'll be even more chaotic. Only you're different. You're a true disciple of Mount Yi, a swordsman with strong mental strength. The sharpness of your flying sword is also the nemesis of these demonic bodies. Therefore, if there's only one person in Jin Dan that the demonic body doesn't want to possess, it must be you. Chapter 685. Lu Xiaoyi pointed into the distance and said with a smile, I don't think so, right? I saw a few swordsmen. It seems they are not stupid. Taoist Qi Shui said with disdain. They are completely different from you. To be honest, those swordsmen Jin Dan and Xianyuan might not be much stronger than us. We are just using the name of swordsman and the background of the origin world to make everyone feel at ease. Brother Fei, we are asking you this because of Blood River sect and the Tao of Gu. If you find any abnormality among us, just do it. Don't hesitate, we won't blame you. That includes me and Bai Qiu. Although we are from the unorthodox sect, we don't want to live like this. Let's have a quick death. Taoist Bai Qiu nodded with a firm expression and looked straight at him. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. They were all sentimental and righteous people. Firstly, they were afraid that they would become walking corpses. Secondly, they were afraid that the evil spirit would take over their bodies and bring harm to their sections. If they were to return to the Yellow Rock Grand Canyon and kill one every few days, they would not be able to find out anything. They would have to exterminate their sects. I'll try my best. But I have never come into contact with this thing, so I have no clue at all. I think Bai Qiu is abnormal. He is usually a man of few words, but he has spoken so much today. Why don't we start with him? Taoist Qishui nodded. You are right. I have disliked this guy for a long time. So that's why. Baijiu stared at him. Why can't it be you who is anemic? With a joke, the two felt much more relaxed and less nervous. They were experienced cultivators, so they had their own methods to adjust their mentality. Taoist Qishui continued. The few reverends have given a strict order. Regardless of whether they are gold core cultivators or nascent soul cultivators, none of them are allowed to leave before the matter is settled. Otherwise, you will be killed on the spot. You have to be careful, don't let others misunderstand. Every sect is looking for external help, and they are basically doing the same task as you, to identify the abnormalities. In fact, the number of stowaways that could rush out of the crack was secondary. If they really rush out, once the battle begins, Brother Fei, don't just focus on killing. That's our duty. What you need to pay more attention to is whether any of us are intentionally going easy on them. That's the real reason why we invited you here. Lu Xiaoyi felt a little rushed with the heavy responsibility on his shoulders, but this was not something he could decide. It's really hard to say what's going on with this abnormal measurement. What if Baiji sees the beauty of a woman who was smuggled out and has the idea of taking her in as a concubine? I'm not the aniseed in his stomach. What's the difference? He was not joking. Battles were ever-changing, and cultivators had different thoughts. Because of the characteristics of their orthodoxies, the choice of battle tactics, the situation they were in, and the coordination between each other, how could it be so easy to distinguish whether a cultivator was going all out or deliberately going easy on the opponent? He was not familiar with any of these people and had no idea about their fighting habits. Taoist Chang Shui could do nothing about this, he could only say, I can't guarantee others, but the few drops of essence blood of us Blood River cultivators are the purest, red with a tinge of purple. The purple contains the spirit, it cannot be faked. If the essence blood in the Blood River is tainted or not pure, then there must be a problem. As for Baiji, at least he won't hesitate because of beauty, instead, he will be even more vicious. Let me tell you a secret, that thing of his has already become useless because of cultivating Gu. Baiji's eyes bulged. If not for the occasion, he would have turned hostile immediately. You bloody Chang Shui! I will remember this today. Brother Fei, I have already demonstrated my Gu worms to you, you have to pay attention to that righteous heart Gu. If the heart is not pure, it can't be used. Lu Xiaoyi felt they were still a little nervous, he laughed. So simple? Then wouldn't every Gu cultivator be able to prove their innocence by using righteous heart Gu once? Baiji sighed. Not every Gu cultivator can cultivate righteous heart Gu. Moreover, this is a final method, the expenditure is huge and cannot be used easily. Why don't you call a few Blood River Gu Dao's enlightened masters? Eugene Dan cultivators have to hold on by yourselves, it is too tiring. It is also dangerous. Taoist Chang Shui said bitterly. Unorthodox methods are difficult. Yuanying is rare. It is no longer the same as before. If we can, we will do it ourselves, let's not trouble them, we can't afford to lose. The three of them chatted as they slowly approached the crack. Up until now, Lu Xiaoyi had not found anything related to fate, or anyone related to it. However, he was not in a hurry. What would come would come. He just had to wait calmly. The area allocated to Blood River Gu Dao was less than 3,000 li, occupying 30% of the entire crack. This was probably the true strength of the two sects in the land of exile. They would not give more, but they could not let you skimp on it either. He introduced the cultivators of the two clans one by one. They were all Jindan realm experts of the two clans. Even if they didn't turn out in full force, most of them had come. Everyone looked at Lu Xiaoyi with a very strange gaze, because this person was their friend, but he could also be the person who killed them. Chang Shui continued. When that demonic charm does not possess a person, it has a faint shadow that can be sensed. According to the enlightened masters, if this thing achieves yuanying, it does not even have a shadow, that is when it truly comes and goes without a trace, it cannot be traced. However, when it possessed the body of a cultivator, everything would be hidden from view. We know there must be a way to identify it. It is impossible for there to be an undetectable demonic charm in the cultivation world. But our knowledge is limited. The land of exile's inheritances cannot do this. It would be great if this was in clear sky, be it Shao Mountain or Three Pure Ones. It would be easy to find its roots. Baiji interrupted. Aren't you talking nonsense? It is not stupid. Why would it go to the main world to seek death? Chan Shui knew that this person was looking for revenge for exposing his secret, so he ignored him. Brother Fei, come with me. I will teach you how to identify the possible aura of living creatures in the outer space crack. You don't know when it will come in handy. This is the experience of the indigenous people of the land of exile for tens of thousands of years. It is passed down by word of mouth, it is not written. Outsiders will not teach it. Under the two's wholehearted teaching, Lu Xiaoyi quickly grasped the differences. At the same time, he finally knew where the thing he wanted was. In the outer space crack, there was real fate. It was not much, but it was very active. Its nature was similar to the transmission of fate on Sand Star when he formed his Aurus core. He was getting closer and closer to the truth. We don't know where these stowaways will rush out from. When there is a sign, the time left for us will be very short. You don't need to be at the front to sense it. Your task is different. You can be a bit later, between us and the enlightened masters behind us. If there is any movement, we will send a signal and then quickly gather. And your task is to find that guy. Lu Xiaoyi asked a question he had always wanted to ask. We have less than 3,000 miles of control here. So from the perspective of possibility, it is more likely that these people will rush out from the positions guarded by other forces. Then, do we need to go over and help? Chapter 686. Jiu Shui did not hesitate. We will help. Apart from the necessary precautions. This concerns the entire land of exile, we should not be too clear about it. Lu Xiaoyi went straight to the point. If you are separated, I cannot take care of both the battlefield and those who stay behind. Jiu Shui thought for a while. You can only take care of one side. Also, I think that if the evil spirit wants to help the stowaways, he will definitely choose to participate in the battle, right? Brother Fei, you will go wherever there is a battle. The narrow and long area of the crack in outer space was about 3,000 miles in the north. 100 cultivators were in charge. Each of them was about 10 miles away. If there was any movement, they could immediately sense it. They were the closest to the crack, so there was almost no distance between them and the crack. They were the shortest distance to sense and avoid being pulled into the crack. 10 miles away, there were foreign cultivators like Lu Xiaoyi. Their main task was to screen, not to deal with the stowaways. There were many such cultivators, about 7 or 8 of them. Even the Blood River sect had another screening cultivator. Jiu Shui did not say anything, and Lu Xiaoyi did not ask. Another 10 miles away, there were 6 or 7 Yuanian cultivators in charge. Such a scene had not been seen for thousands of years. If it was not for the evil spirit, there would only be 2 or 3 Yuanian cultivators outside the crack in outer space. They would kill any cultivator who wanted to leave, no matter where they came from. It was a little cruel, but Lu Xiaoyi understood. People did not understand how such a thing thought. If it was left alone, it would bring disaster to the land of exile. His friend's request was the evil spirit from outer space, while his own wish was the secret of the fate bearer. Would these two things be the same thing in the end? He did not know. Among the 100 Jin Dan cultivators from the sect of the Blood River and the Tao of Voodoo, he found a few lucky ones. They were all in a lifeless and unactivated state. However, he could not guarantee that there were no other hidden ones among these people, just like the 3 pure ones in Qingxian. He was inclined to believe that there were none because people like him and Qingxian were a gift from the heavenly axiom. On the other hand, the grassland and the land of exile were purely man-made. There was a huge difference. In addition, the heaven-defying sect and other forces had more cultivators guarding the area, so there must be more people carrying fate. However, he couldn't monitor everyone. The crack, which was nearly 10,000 miles long, was beyond the range of his divine sense. There was one thing that Wu Shui was right about. No matter what happened, as long as there was a purpose, then those with ulterior motives would definitely appear in the most chaotic places. He only needed to keep an eye on the battlefield, and could only give up on everything else. Everyone stayed in their respective positions and occasionally passed on their sporadic discoveries to each other. After a few days of peace, Lu Xiaoyi could feel that the stowaways gathered in the crack had not left. He wondered what they were waiting for. Were they reinforcements in the crack? Or news of evil spirits? He was not in a hurry. He had waited for nearly 300 years, so he could wait a little longer. Just like Lu Xiaoyi in the north, there were also people waiting in the southernmost area of the crack, which was more than 2,000 miles in the north. The arrangement of the cultivators in the crack was that the heaven-defying sect was in charge of the middle area. 3,000 miles in the north was for the Gu Taoism of the Blood River sect, and 2,000 miles in the south was for the alliance of other small and medium-sized forces in the land of exile. The heaven-defying sect was in the middle, so that they could provide support. The forces defending the south were more diverse. They were all sects and families with some historical inheritances in the land of exile. In the land of exile, being able to come to the crack to help in the defense was also a symbol of status. They had the right to speak in the affairs of the land of exile. Of course, they would invite people and use their connections. They would always be able to get in touch with some special and powerful cultivators. For example, the Shaoyang sect found a Taoist who traveled alone. His background was unknown, but he was very easygoing. They had known him for a few years and admired his ability. It was not surprising that they guessed that this Taoist might have come from the blue sky main world to travel. It was not surprising that they all knew their place and did not inquire about each other's actual situation. However, when there was an incident around the crack, they were the best helpers. Because of their superior strength, and because they came from the blue sky main world, they would not be selfish. Among all the invitees, there were many swordsmen. It was also a deep-rooted trust in the name of Xianyuan. Qing Xian floated outside the crack and thought. He had been in the land of exile for nearly 5 years and had made some local friends. Otherwise, he would not have come here. He was looking for that swordsman. However, he also knew that even if he found him, he would probably end up like the last time. There was no way to tell if he was dead or alive. The fighting space was too big and could not restrict the swordsman's movements. Moreover, this guy was not someone who would be impulsive. He needed a suitable setting, so he was waiting for an opportunity. Although the land of exile was not small, it was still far from the blue sky main world. As long as he had the heart, he would be able to get what he wanted. This time, he came to the crack because he was invited by his friends from the Shaoyang sect. Since he was here, he did not mind contributing to the land of exile. It was not for Xianyuan, but for the people who were born here and worked hard to cultivate. After all, the land of exile was the other side of the blue sky main world. It was not a completely foreign place. When he came here, he realized that this was the place he had been looking forward to for a long time. In front of him was the crack, and behind him was the Yuanying sect. There was no better opportunity than this. Moreover, he also judged that a person like this swordsman who spent a lot of time in the land of exile must have left a reputation. He must be one of the people who were invited. He did not doubt this at all. Although he had not seen Lu Xiaoyi yet, he knew that this guy must be somewhere in the crack. He was not in a hurry. As long as there was a battle, everyone would gather. The opportunity came so suddenly that he felt uneasy. It was not because of this person, but because of some strange things in the land of exile. There were many people who had fate here, and it was a fate that was not the same as his. He had been in the land of exile for less than a year, but he quickly realized this. Because he had been modified by yin and yang, he could clearly sense all of this. To him, this was more important than killing people. Therefore, in the next few years, he had started to deviate. He no longer focused on tracking down the swordsman. Instead, he was looking for the source of fate. After years of hard work, although he did not understand it as well as Lu Xiaoyi did, some things on the surface had surfaced. There was a mysterious force operating in the land of exile, creating people with luck, and then sending them to blue sky with a purpose. In fact, they were sent to Xianyuan. This made him come to a shocking conclusion. Could it be that the core reason for the rise of Xianyuan over the past 10,000 years was because of the land of exile? Was all of this secretly arranged by Xianyuan? But the question was, how did they manage to create such an illusory thing like providence? He could not be blamed for coming to the wrong conclusion. After all, he had only been here for a short time and had not experienced the Dragon Boat Convention. In his opinion, this information was much more important than killing a swordsman with potential. It was of strategic significance. Chapter 687. If Qin Xian had to choose between the two missions, he felt that it was more important to figure out the problem of fate. This was a contradiction. One was a mission from the sect, but it was a tactical mission. The other was his personal discovery, but it was a strategic mission. Which one was more important? If he killed the swordsman here, he would no longer have the chance to investigate in the land of exile. This had been a dilemma for him for the past few days. No one could report it to the higher-ups, so he could only make the decision himself. Just like Lu Xiaoyi, he had never mentioned the problem of his own luck to the sect. This also meant that it would be very difficult for him to explain to the sect why he gave up on the mission and chose an inexplicable direction unless he told them all of his secrets. This was a problem for the future, so he could think about it calmly. The problem right now was that if he met the swordsman, what would he do? As long as the swordsman saw him, he would definitely understand his intentions. But he would not know that he did not want to kill anyone now. He thought so hard that his head was about to explode. There was no way to get the best of both worlds, so he could only improvise when the time came. The situation was getting out of control, and he did not like it. An unclear goal was the worst situation for a mission. Just as he was feeling lost, one of the cultivators in charge of the defense of the crack in the south suddenly shouted, "There's something unusual about 900 miles to the south. The aura of spiritual opportunity is gathering." The cultivators who were originally scattered all over the crack quickly gathered at this location, leaving only a small number of them to guard against accidents. This was a pre-planned plan, so they did not appear to be panicking. This kind of situation had happened several times, but it did not mean that the people in the crack would definitely rush out. However, they should not let their guard down. This was the experience of the cultivators in the land of exile for tens of thousands of years, so no one would complain. But this time, it was real. More than 30 foreign cultivators rushed out and formed a defensive formation in the shortest amount of time possible. This indicated two things. First, they didn't want to admit defeat so easily. Second, they were well aware of the situation that the native cultivators were in. On the side of the land of exile, a leading cultivator stepped forward to read out the policy. This was a routine they were used to. It showed their tolerance, and made it easier for the other forces to surround them. However, the stowaways were not stupid at all. After the formation was completed, they immediately advanced forward. The cultivators of the land of exile could not let them escape. Spells flew, and the battle suddenly broke out. Qin Xian did not step forward. Instead, he observed from afar. It was not because he was afraid of the enemy, but because it was his responsibility. He stood outside the field and looked for the evil spirit that could possess cultivators. Of course, it was also to avoid the swordsman for the time being. Until now, he had not figured out whether it was better to complete the hunting mission or not. Or was it better to pursue the truth of Xuanyuan's secret? As an outstanding disciple of the Three Pure Ones, he believed that the reason why humans were the wisest of all creatures was that they knew the importance of things and knew how to be flexible. In the current situation, there was no need to think too much about which was more important. The battle was very fierce, but there were no casualties for the time being. The stowaways knew the significance of the formation. They were few in number, and if they lost the formation, they would be defeated one by one. However, they were obviously united and did not want to lose their companions. The indigenous cultivators did not fight with their lives on the line. The cultivators from the heaven-defying sect in the center would arrive soon. There were also cultivators from the Blood River sect and the Goo Poison sect further away. There was no need to fight now. If they missed the formation, it would be better to run than to chase. In the cultivation world, it was always easier to run than to chase, especially when the stowaways were very strong. They were not a group of second-rate cultivators who did not have the complete Tao of heaven to deal with. Their biggest advantage was the advantage of numbers and the advantage of being the landlord. The Yuanying at the back did not make a move. Under normal circumstances, it would be easy for the Yuanying to break the formation and kill them one by one. Then what? They still did not know where the evil spirit was. They hoped that it would be more chaotic. Only when it was more chaotic, the evil spirit would not be able to control himself and interfere. The cultivators of the land of exile were scattered. There was a difference in individual strength, and there was no formation to connect them. This was the inevitable result. However, this situation was quickly improved because the cultivators of the heaven-defying sect who were closest to them had arrived. The number of people surrounding them was still increasing, because it was difficult to coordinate in the crack. It seemed that the southern section was close to the northern section, but this was in the normal space of the land of exile. If it was in the crack, it often meant that the distance was longer. The key was that it was impossible to find the way. Qin Xian's first thought was that maybe the evil spirit was not on the same side as the stowaways. The reason why they came to make trouble might be because of their eccentric nature? Or maybe they wanted to find a stronger body? Or maybe there were other reasons that humans could not understand for the time being? The battle began to become fierce. The united stowaways and the numerous indigenous cultivators, in a group fight in the cultivation world, how to fight with numbers was a test of coordination ability. For example, there were now more than 200 cultivators from the land of exile surrounding them. One after another, the cultivators from the Path of Blood River venomous insect also joined in. How to integrate the strength of these people and form a joint force was a problem. Moreover, to surround these stowaways from all directions, they had to invest their strength in every direction. This also diluted the advantage of the land of exile in terms of numbers. Of course, the stowaways could only solve the problem temporarily. After a long time, if this method of breaking through failed, it was likely that they would be wiped out. The cultivators from the land of exile fought and retreated. They were experienced. Since the orthodoxies could not cooperate well with each other, they formed teams of their own orthodoxies and distributed themselves in various positions in the direction of the stowaways. This move might not be able to finish off the opponents in the shortest time, but the advantage was that it was safe. The longer it dragged on, the tighter the net would be. Qin Xian vaguely felt that something was wrong. This method of breaking through was too old-fashioned. It seemed that they were gathering into a group and did not want to give up on any one of them. In fact, it was just a sign that they were going to die together. When the cultivators near the crack in the sky were all gathered, the division of labor was clear, and the last chance would be lost. The true meaning of escape was to lose a part and free another part. Which part could not be lost? This was no longer an escape, but a penetration. Whether it was sacrificing the minority to benefit the majority or sacrificing the majority to protect the minority, this was just a technical choice based on the strength of the opponent. He did not believe that with the wisdom of the cultivators, they would not be able to understand the logic of ordinary mortals sacrificing the tail to survive. How could they not understand the meaning of sacrifice when they were in the cultivation world? If they still did this and gave up the best chance to create chaos, it could only mean one thing. The stowaways had other tricks up their sleeves. What was it? There was no time for Qin Xian to think carefully, because in his sight, a familiar figure appeared in the sky. His old opponent had arrived. Chapter 688. Lu Xiaoyi followed the cultivators of the Blood River venomous insect sect to reinforce them. As he ran, he had the same question. Hey! Aren't we unable to move freely in the spatial crack like in normal space? Then why did a few people appear at the north of the crack, but now the main group is attacking from the south? How did they manage to transmit information and coordinate their actions freely in the crack? Daoist Qi Shui was also full of questions. Don't ask me. If I knew this, you would be addressing me as your senior. Who knows what is going on? Maybe it's purely a coincidence, maybe they have a unique method, maybe there is an important branch near the crack. Don't ask me. Once we catch one, everything will be clear. It was an irresponsible answer, completely in line with this guy's character. Lu Xiaoyi did not care. After all, he was mainly watching from the back, observing the possible traces of the evil spirits. At the same time, he was observing the people with luck among the stowaways. The active luck bearers among the stowaways, the unactivated luck bearers in the land of exile, and the evil spirits. Could there be a certain connection between these three things? This was the correct way to solve the mystery, and not to rush in and kill to his heart's content. He also did not think that there were any worthy opponents here. They were only good at dealing with the second-rate cultivators from the land of exile. Moreover, why were they still advancing in formation? Lu Xiaoyi carefully judged the situation around him and found that most of the forces from the land of exile were gathered here. There were more than 200 Jin Dan cultivators, including several Yuanying cultivators dozens of miles away. His intuition told him that he should not get too close to the battle. But his curiosity made it impossible for him to leave. Not only did he and Qing Xian discover this problem, many cultivators from the land of exile who were clear-headed also found it strange. But they could not do anything about it. They could not let these stowaways leave just because they found it strange, right? Of course, the few nascent soul stage cultivators had the same confusion, but they could not determine the trump cards of the stowaways, either, so they could only improvise. Were they supposed to retreat because of possible changes when they were surrounded by more than 200 people? If word got out, it would be a joke. But they did not have time to think further. A stowaway in the magic circle threw an object out. No one paid attention to it. It was a common thing in a battle between the two sides. The object exploded, but nothing happened. It made people suspect that it was a failed operation. Everyone was still paying attention to their opponents, but no one paid attention to the outer space crack behind them. The crack expanded and expanded, instantly expanding to 100 miles wide. Then, it began to shrink rapidly. However, the two sides fighting in the sky were all swallowed up by the crack. Such a shocking scene was only seen by a few cultivators who were in charge of monitoring the other crack areas from afar. Some of them even had no idea what was going on. The stowaways were gone. The defender was gone. Jin Dan was gone. Yuanying was also gone. A well-planned spatial rift trap had swept away all the people in this area. This was a man-made disaster, but also a natural disaster. Space cracks were the most unstable spatial phenomenon in the universe. They were either constantly expanding or shrinking. Space cracks were the most unstable spatial phenomenon in the universe. There was almost no moment when they were still stable. They were either constantly expanding or constantly shrinking. The entrance of the spatial rift in the land of exile had been growing steadily for tens of thousands of years. After tens of thousands of years, it had extended for nearly 1,000 miles. However, this was the result of a long period of time and was not obvious. This sudden change must be the result of someone using a man-made method to trigger the power of nature. The few survivors did not do anything except send letters to their respective forces for help. Should they go in and take a look? Something big had happened. In a distant star area, there was a stargazing tower that reached the clouds. A white-haired, kind-looking old man stood behind him. The young man with white eyebrows was very eye-catching. The old man sighed and murmured, "We failed." The young man with white eyebrows was indifferent. "It's normal. We are also trying to use this method of fate. We just need to try a few more times. The old man shook his head. Using fate to guide the movements of cultivators in spatial rifts is like sewing a needle. It's very magical. I have already touched the essence of it. Unfortunately, there are many other things in this world besides fate that cannot be controlled. The young man with white eyebrows said coldly. What do you mean? The old man closed his eyes. They are still here. However, for some reason, they were forced back into the rift after leaving. One person cannot step into the same rift twice. The exit could not be found, so we could only bring them back. The young man with white eyebrows had a different opinion. You are too lenient. Since it was not a problem caused by fate, it must be a problem with their response. After so many years of preparation, this is the result. They need to be punished. The old man did not care. I may be too lenient, but aren't you a little too strict? Golden core stage cultivators are already somewhat powerless in such a spatial environment, so why should we force them? The young man with white eyebrows insisted. There are always excuses. In a few days I will play a game of chess with old monster Jean of the human sect. I am lacking a few Jean Dan chess pieces. The old man was a little disgusted. I brought them here from their home planets. Since things did not go as planned, I will send them back. I am not using them as chess pieces for you. The young man with white eyebrows disagreed. Aren't you too hypocritical? If your plan succeeds this time, what are the chances of them surviving in an unfamiliar environment? How long can they survive? Even if they are lucky enough to survive, there is no way for them to advance in that place. Won't they still be your chess pieces? Why, they can be your chess pieces, but they can't be my chess pieces? At least with me, if they can help me win this game of chess, they will have the right to cultivate in the first realm of the universe. They will have a chance of survival, or even a great opportunity. It is much better than being your chess pieces and walking down a path to the end. The old man obviously did not want to offend the young man beside him, but he still insisted. I promised their sex. The young man with white eyebrows sneered. You didn't promise anything. If they are alive, send them back. What you are saying is that as long as they come out, they are dead meat. I will be frank. I know you want to try again and need a suitable person to carry fate, but your attempt is too far away. How long do you need to prepare? 100 years? A few hundred years? Such a long time is enough for you to choose someone else, but my game of chess cannot wait. The old man had no choice but to sigh. Fine, I'll just tell their sex that they've been lost in the crack forever. The young man with white eyebrows smiled. This is their result anyway. What is the difference? Originally, both sides had still held back in the battle outside, and they still had a sense of propriety in their attacks. But now, the battle was truly one of life and death, and they would not rest until one of them was dead. Even if they had to be trapped in this spatial crack for the rest of their lives, they had to kill the culprit first to vent their anger. This was the thought of all the exiled cultivators. Crowded, chaotic, and bloody, these were the main themes of the spatial rifts. No one dared to run into the countless small spatial rifts around them because everyone knew that once you got into one of those tunnels that were as dense as spider webs, it was basically impossible to go back. Loneliness would accompany you forever until you drifted to the next exit. You still did not know what was waiting for you outside. Maybe it was a cultivation planet, maybe it was a habitable world, but it was more likely that it was a complex astronomical phenomenon that was everywhere in the universe. Small Jean Dan cultivators like them would die easily if they went out. There was no other possibility. The sudden increase in the intensity of the battle and the disheartened anticipation for the future. Even cultivators, even Jean Dan cultivators, would occasionally lose control of their emotions. Obviously, the stowaways did not fully consider this. The space was crowded, and the formation was not changing smoothly. It had already begun to fall apart. The leader of the cultivators spread out his divine sense. Fellow cultivators! Please listen to me. We are only here to seek a stable place for cultivation. The reason why we used the art of extension was to throw the nascent soul stage Taoist master out. We are not trying to kill everyone. This space-extending technique is different from a real spatial rift. It expands quickly and closes quickly. If everyone can calm down and wait for the rift to close, most people will still return to your world. But if you continue to be so crazy, I really don't know what will happen. He shouted himself hoarse, but no one was willing to listen to him. The reason was simple. Since the space-extending crack would return to its original state sooner or later, everyone would return if they didn't kill you. What was the difference? Most people would return. What about the small number of people? Who should stay here? From the beginning to the end, this group of people had their own plans and did not care about the lives of the cultivators in the land of exile. If they really went to the land of exile, who could guarantee that they would not cause trouble and gang up? Moreover, no one knew whether this person was telling the truth or not. What if he was just fooling everyone to appease them? Killing them was the best way to go. Qin Xian remained calm. He was not as crazy as the cultivators in the land of exile. There were not many cultivators who could handle things as calmly as him, and that included him and the sword cultivator. They were watching from afar by the walls of the crack. This was the state of mind. One could not panic in front of a landslide and remain calm in the face of death. This was strength, the basic psychological quality to escape from danger. Even if it was so chaotic, they would not give up on finding the source of the chaos. The stowaways, the space-extending crack, the carrier of fate, Lu Xiaoyi, was in danger. Qin Xian was still calm. He was already in a space-extending crack and could only remain calm. He did not care about the carriers of fate in the exile, nor did he consider the evil spirits. Of course, the mission to kill Lu Xi was also thrown to the back of his mind. What he cared about the most now was 3 people. The 3 stowaways. Because these 3 people were the only ones among the stowaways who had fate, and it was an active fate. He could not help but think about the relationship between the fate of these people and the cultivators in the exile and the fate of the Xianyuan swordsman. It was getting more and more complicated. From his observation, the inheritance of Tao that these 3 people showed was completely different from the other stowaways. This meant that the stowaways might not be a whole, but a Tao with the cultivator who shouted as the main body and the 3 carriers of fate. Among the 3 people, there was a swordsman and 2 Dharma cultivators. Their concealment of their own fate had to be exposed because of the fierce battle. However, these 3 people were obviously not of the same mind as the other stowaways. They were retreating to the same branch of the crack. In terms of strength, the 3 people were far more powerful than the cultivators in the exile. But strangely, they did not seem to want to show this strength. In the chaos, the 3 people were about to retreat to one of the countless branches of the crack. The cultivators in the exile could not stop them. What surprised him was that the Xianyuan Lu Xiaoyi made a move. A flying sword silently mixed in with the waves of countless spells flew toward the swordsman among the 3 people. Qin Xian seemed to have understood something. He did not hesitate, and immediately attacked the other Dharma cultivator among the 3 people. Chapter 690. When the 2 top Jinan stage cultivators from the Blue Sky main world took action, they were completely different from the cultivators from the land of exile. In the chaotic and complicated atmosphere of the battlefield, by the time the 2 realized that the situation had changed, it was already too late. Lu Xiu's starting point was his sneak attack, and Qin Xian was not that bad either. His technique looked ordinary from afar, but it was deadly in close range. Once the sneak attack started, the enemy would follow one after another. This was the essence of sneak attack, to beat the enemy while they were down. Lu Xiaoyi was first injured by the hidden fragrance, then killed by the Ju Qing. This process was not easy. This swordsman with unknown heritage was very tough. If he did not sneak attack first, it would take a lot of effort to get the result. Qin Xian used his technique to bind the enemy, and he also had a hard time winning. In the end, He could only use his trump card, the yin-yang technique. The third cultivator was shocked. He was the weakest of the three. Just as he was about to escape into the branch of the crack, he was pounced on by a shadow. While they were fighting fiercely, the main battle group had already seen the result. It was not that the land of exile and the stowaways had decided the winner, but that the crack in the space had shrunk rapidly and had already thrown some of the cultivators out. This proved that the leader of the stowaways was not lying. Due to external forces, the crack in the space could not last long. It was fading faster than everyone expected. This almost immediately interrupted the battle. The battle was fierce because there was no hope of survival. Once there was hope of escaping, who would be willing to fight to the death here? Everyone was flying in the direction of the receding fissure. Escaping danger was their first priority, because no one knew how far the spatial fissure would recede before it stopped. Wouldn't staying here be waiting for death? Although there were still fights due to the crowded front, it was no longer a life and death struggle. However, there were two people who fell behind, Ho Shui and Bai Ji. When the two of them saw their friends were still fighting in the depths of the crack, they could not help but shout, "Brother Fei! Why aren't you coming over? If the crack stops shrinking, you won't be able to get out!" It was also at this moment that the two of them saw the shadow pounce on one of them. They immediately understood that their friend was chasing after that evil spirit. While they were talking, the crack had already shrunk to the size of the blood. He and Baijiu had been fighting for their entire lives, but at this moment, their hearts and minds were connected. Turning their bodies into the blood river, burning their blood essence to build a blood river bridge. This was the blood river cultivator's last resort. By burning their blood essence, they could maintain the connection of the blood river under any circumstances. However, there was a limit to their blood essence. Taoist Byron was standing at the head of the blood river, guarding Lu Xiui. In this way, they left the last path for Lu Xiui. At this time, Lu Xiui and Qing Xian had just killed their respective opponents. The evil spirits were right in front of them. The buzzing of the space crack was quickly weakening. This kind of sound was very obvious at the beginning of the crack's expansion, but now it was almost silent. Everyone knew that this meant that the crack was shrinking and was close to shrinking. What should he do? There might still be a chance for him to escape using the river of blood, but at the same time, he lost the possibility of tracking down the mystery of luck. If he didn't leave, he would be stuck in a spatial crack for the rest of his life. He might never be able to make a name for himself again. Qin Xian was also faced with the same choice. But he had his eyes fixed on Lu Xiui. For him, the safety of the three pure ones was more important than anything else. Keeping an eye on the swordsman was the key to solving the problem. It was not anyone's decision that solved the problem for them, but an accident that was not an accident. Apart from the few of them, there was also an ordinary cultivator from the land of exile in the space crack. Perhaps he was pushed to the back due to his lack of ability, or perhaps he was too slow to react. Lu Xiaoyi reacted quickly. He shouted, "This man is deceitful. Back off, don't worry about me." His flying sword flew out, but it was too late to stop the man's scheme. The cultivator's aura burst out, and a huge and pure fire elemental spell was unleashed. With him as the center, it was as if a sun had risen. The fire elemental spell was not only the bane of the blood river, but also the bane of the venomous insects. In addition, there was a huge gap between their skills. As soon as the sun rose, Taoist Byron, who refused to back off, could not stop the overwhelming fire even with all the venomous insects in his body. He was burned to ashes. What followed was the venomous insect's blood. In order to pull Lu Xiaoyi out of the space crack, he had made the blood river extremely short outside the crack, but extremely long inside the crack, just so that Lu Xiaoyi could reach it. It was also because he had set up the blood river bridge in this way that almost all of his blood essence was burned in the crevice. With only 1 or 2 drops of blood essence left, he could no longer control the blood river and fell out of the crevice. He was supported by his fellow disciples, but his vitality was greatly damaged, and his hundreds of years of cultivation were all wasted in one day. Without even looking back, the cultivator stepped out of the crack before it finally stopped shrinking. The flying sword behind him struck furiously, but it only managed to break the man's shadow. The space trembled and the crack returned to normal. Everyone in it could no longer get out. At least, this crack was no longer an exit. Because of this sudden turn of events, the third cultivator, who was also the cultivator who was possessed by the evil spirit, had already escaped without a trace while he was not paying attention. In such a large space, only Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian were left. Quietly, the Big Dipper returned to its box. Lu Xiaoyi looked at Qing Xian quietly and said, "You, the three pure ones, have been looking for me. You want to eliminate the potential threat of Xian Yuan. I understand, and I don't mind. But you shouldn't have killed my friend. You've been looking for a place where swordsman can control his sword, and this place is just the right one. I think it suits you, doesn't it? Let's stay here, and none of us should run away. If we don't solve this problem, everyone will feel uncomfortable." Qing Xian shook her head and sighed. "I don't even know how to explain. But I still have to explain. I've never explained anything to anyone in my life, and you're the first one. Killing you is my mission. I don't deny it, and you know it. But I didn't know there was a second person. This should be Qin Kong Taiching's idea, and I didn't know. I didn't make a move, not because I changed my mind, but because I sensed something more important. It's about fate. I don't believe that you don't know anything about this. You might know more than me. I originally thought that this was Xuanyuan's arrangement in the land of exile, to send a seed of fate to the main world. Only now did I know that I was wrong. I think you're investigating something as well? Personal life and death is a small matter, but the conspiracy of the outer realm is a big matter. I thought that before we figure out everything, there's no need to fight to the death. I don't have the confidence, and you don't have the chance to win either. Everyone knows that. I'm very sorry about your friend's death. But you have to know that the three pure ones, including Taiqing, Yuqing, and Shangqing, are different from each other. I suggest that we work together to find out the truth about fate. No matter who's alive, we have the right to settle what happened just now. If you're alive, you do it. If I'm alive, I'll do it. If we're both alive, we'll do it together. As for the matter between us, after we figure out fate and deal with that guy, we'll settle it separately." Chapter 691. Lu Xiaoyi felt a little uncomfortable. Jianxue and Bai, these two friends from the unorthodox school, used practical actions to explain their understanding of friendship. One was dead, and the other's fate was unknown. There were real men in the unorthodox school too. They didn't know each other for long, and there were many other interests involved, but it didn't mean that there was no real friendship. He didn't know if he could do it in the same situation, but these two people did it. Maybe there were other reasons they pulled him into the crack to solve the threat of the evil spirits. But in the end, they only considered that they couldn't leave their friend alone in the crack for the rest of his life. This made Lu Xiaoyi a little sad. His two friends still didn't know him well. He was such a person who was afraid of death. How could he easily put himself in danger because of a few stowaways? He would rather stay in the crack forever because of the evil spirits? It was because they didn't communicate with each other that they didn't know Lu Xiaoyi's secret. They didn't know that Lu Xiaoyi cared more about the secrets of fate. They didn't know that he didn't care about the cluelessness of the crack. If they knew, they wouldn't fight so hard for him. He knew that this was just a path that his friend had chosen. But now, because of him, it caused an irreversible result. This made him feel a little guilty. This could have been avoided. He wasn't an impulsive person, he never was. The angrier he was, the calmer he was. So he knew that what his opponent said was actually right. What was his purpose? To find out if the mass of fate was a conspiracy against the fifth ring of blue sky. And to kill the murderer who had been hiding in the background. This person must be the one who released the black cloud. He had already judged and was waiting for him to appear. In fact, before today, he had been wondering if the black cloud was released by Qin Xian. It didn't seem to be his style. Now he understood everything. If he impulsively fought with Qin Xian, the happiest person would be the Taiqing cultivator who left, right? If he did that, he might not achieve any of his goals. If they joined hands, both goals could be achieved. You know him? Do you have a grudge? Qin Xian sneered. I don't know him. Just like you, I came from the fifth ring. Then I went to the South Sea to wait for you. Then I walked from the West Sand to the land of exile. I didn't even stay in Longhuan blessed land for a month. How could I know these treasures of the Grand Pure One? Lu Shui was surprised. Is the internal strife of the three Pure Ones already so serious? Qin Xian did not want to talk too much about his sex scandals, but he felt guilty towards swordsmen, so he had to say more. Just like how the three Pure Ones can't bear to see Xian Yuan produce talented people, there are also some people within the three Pure Ones who are unwilling to see the Prime Clear Ones have too many talents. So if there's a chance, it's normal to do something, especially in the Azure Sky Great World. It's not like in the Fifth Ring where everyone has to stay united because of external pressure. Lu Xiai smiled. This is good news for us swordsmen. Qin Xian snorted. Don't be happy too early. Although this kind of relationship has been bumpy, it has been for tens of thousands of years, and it hasn't broken up. The higher-ups of the Grand Pure One will not give such an order. It's all up to the cultivators below to figure it out. If they do well, they will be rewarded. If they don't do well, it's their own decision, and they can't do anything. After a few words, neither of them mentioned how to get out of the space crack. It was as if it had nothing to do with them. Working together was one thing, but if they did not even have the ability to walk out of the space crack, what was the point of working together? Experts' understanding of working together was different from ordinary people. It was both an alliance and a competition, and there was also a hidden killing intent. After all, they were enemies, rivals, and this would never change. Unless the external sword lineage withdrew from Xianyuan, or the Prime Clear Ones broke away from the Three Pure Ones, was it possible? I'll take my leave first. Goodbye. Qin Xian cupped his hands and disappeared into a random crack. He had too many questions to ask Lu Shi, but he could not ask now, because he did not have anything of equal value to exchange. Lu Shi came to the place where the fiery dance of the brilliant sun burned, which was also the place where Taoist Bai Sun disappeared. It was empty, and there was no sign to show that there was a living cultivator here at that time. Hundreds of years of cultivation were gone in a day, and it was a pity. His divine sense carefully scanned the space. His efforts paid off. A pitch-black shiny object the size of a thumb and a compass attracted his attention. He took them over to take a look and understood. The pitch-black shiny bead was by Jiu's righteous heart venomous insect. Even under the scorching sun, it didn't turn into ashes because of its righteousness. However, its life force had already been cut off, so it was just a thought. Even the heterodox path had its own chi of righteousness. The world of cultivation was so strange. The compass was left behind by the stowaways, and it was the thing that created the crack in space. It might be a one-off item, or there was no time to pick it up during the chaos. He did not hesitate anymore, and needed to plan for his future. This time, he did not rush to get rid of the crack in space, because he did not want to be troubled by the mystery of fate. Now that there was an opportunity, of course, he would pursue it relentlessly. He would not give up until he reached his goal. He sank his consciousness into his mind and emptied his mind, allowing his luck-intercepting cluster to sense everything around him. Soon, he found a dozen or so possible passageways from the thousands of cracks around him. The reason was very simple. These dozen or so passageways faintly emitted the aura of luck summoning. This was the source of the flood of fate in Sandstar, Whirling So, the grassland, and the land of exile. He had no doubt about it. What he needed to do was to follow this trace of guidance, and keep searching until he reached the other end. What could he do when he reached the other end? He really didn't think that a mere golden core cultivator wouldn't be able to change anything, right? Should he stay in the blue sky or the 5 rings and wait for the change to come? Or should he take the initiative to find out the truth? He made a real swordsman's choice. The space passage was like a spider's web in a spider's hole. You would never know where the beginning was. Where was the end? Where was the entrance? Where was the exit? Which path was clear? Which path was a dead end? He could not locate it. The star positioning system was completely meaningless in such an environment. But he was not in a hurry. He knew that he would definitely be able to get out, and it would definitely be a place where cultivation flourished. It was just time. There were often many paths in front of him. This only meant that these cracks were all unobstructed. At the very least, in theory, the aura of providence could be transmitted over. The only thing he needed to determine was which crack was more stable and which one was more chaotic. The cracks and tunnels were always in a state of unstable change. Perhaps it could not be described as a breath, but it could definitely be described as a month or a year. The aura of fate could pass through, but it did not mean that people could pass through as well. Therefore, he would often return to the same path. He had to try his best to remember the path he had taken. Otherwise, if he kept repeating it, it would waste his precious time. Chapter 692. 3 months later, at a fork in the road, Lu Xiaoyi sensed the aura of another cultivator. This surprised him. It would be fate if he could meet someone else in such a huge maze. Would it be a surprise? Or a battle? If it was a beautiful one, the space at the fork in the road was very small, so he could not wait until they reached the fork in the road to confirm the other party's identity. Otherwise, if there was a battle, it would be a close fight. It would be fine if he met a spell cultivator, but it would be troublesome if he met a body cultivator. Although he had no experience in this area, he knew what to do. Now was the time for both parties to release their aura to communicate. After all, they were not familiar with each other, and did not know each other's background. Lu Xiaoyi simulated the waves of a spell and used the spell to simulate 3 big words. "I'm in a hurry!" A sword chime came from the other party's rift. "I'll go first." This was the most common way of meeting in a space rift. At a fork in the road, they each took one path. Obviously, they would take the other path in the end. Since they were going to take the same path, they had to separate and maintain their distance to be safe. As for whether they would travel together in the future, that was a matter for another time. Feeling the sword chime of his opponent, Lu Xiaoyi could not help but scold. "What's that sound? It sounds like a ghost's cry? Please don't ruin the reputation of the swordsman when you're outside, okay?" At the same time, the other cultivator was also very unhappy. "How can you write something like that? Is there a spell cultivator who can write such lousy words? And what kind of spell is this? Did Mistress teach you?" Both of them did not hesitate and met at the fork in the road. Lu Xiaoyi was puzzled. "You're such an orthodox Taoist, and you're doing such sneaky things when you're on the road?" Qing Xian retorted. "The swordsman's righteousness is just a rumor. You pretend to be a spell cultivator when there's no one around?" Since they met here, there was nothing more to say. Lu Xiaoyi must have swallowed the fate of the swordsman among the stowaways. Otherwise, he would not have sensed the guidance of fate. Qing Xian was not a good person either. When it was time to eat, it would not hesitate to swallow the fate of the Dharma cultivators. Therefore, to the two of them, the guidance of the karmic luck they sensed was actually the same. However, there were too many forks in the road and too many choices. That was why they decided to meet 3 months later. In theory, they would meet sooner or later, because they were pulled by the same thread. Hee, Brother Qing Xian's luck is very strong. He must have swallowed a lot of people. The 3 pure ones are big sections. Their appetite is really good. Yes, I still can't compare to Brother Cigarette Butt's teeth. He could even taste the color of the food. Aren't you afraid that these things will mess up your brain? The two of them traveled side by side. Although they were genuine opponents, they trusted each other incomparably because they had a common goal. Qin Xian asked, "How long has it been since you discovered it?" Lu Xiaoyi did not hide it from him, because he realized that in the process of searching for the secret, he could not do without this fellow. In an unfamiliar domain, with unfamiliar enemies, there were only the two of them, so he could not hide it and make a wrong judgment. Having a reliable helper was better than not having one. More than 100 years. At that time, I was still at the fifth ring. But I can't confirm the truth. Is it a coincidence? Or is it a conspiracy? Is it good or bad? Qin Xian was thoughtful. So you suspect that this is actually targeted at the fifth ring? The reason these things also appeared in blue sky is because Xian Yuan and the three Pure Ones bases are in blue sky. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. That should be the case. There's no need to go through so much trouble to deal with a sect. Qin Xian agreed with his judgment. If it was discovered 100 years ago, it seems like this will continue for at least a few hundred years, or even 1,000 years. Then it's a big move. For a domain like the fifth ring, 1,000 years of preparation is not too long. Sigh, with the fifth ring's way of doing things, this will happen sooner or later. Retribution will come. No one can avoid it. Lu Xiaoyi said. What we need to figure out is which domains are involved in this conspiracy? What role do the masses of karmic luck play in this? Are they spying? Or are they going to descend in the future? Qin Xian thought even further. These things won't reach the ears of low-level cultivators like Jin Dan unless it's about to be activated. Even Yuanying won't be able to do it. The biggest possibility is that the plan is still in the minds of these conspirators. How can we find out? Even if we acknowledge them as our fathers, it's useless. And there's another problem. Even if we know something, how are we going to send the information back? I have a feeling that the distance won't be short. Even if we reach Yuanying, I'm afraid we won't be able to fly back. Lu Xiaoyi retorted. Just say that you're beating a dog with meat buns. Then why are you still following us? Qin Xian spread out her hands. I originally wanted to follow you so I could figure out what secrets Xian Yuan has on the path of karmic luck. But who knew that you swordsmen don't do things according to plan? Logic. Purely on impulse. Have you ever thought that our destination might be a high-level realm on par with the fifth ring realm? This is almost inevitable. Otherwise, why would they dare to attack the fifth ring? We're going with two unfamiliar faces and unfamiliar orthodoxies. If this isn't courting death, then what is? Do you think we're going to the wilderness? That you can start your spying work anywhere you want? Dream on. What realm do you think someone who can use karmic luck to conduct long-distance navigation should be at? At the very least, a perfected lord. For such a long distance, would they not send their trusted subordinates? Would they not be familiar with them? Would they not even ask when they get back and just let us go like we're farts? After Qin Xian finished venting, Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. Then, why are you still following the karmic luck's guidance? You might be able to find a way out if you find a random branch of a crack. There's no need to be afraid. Qin Xian sighed. Why? Because I know that the chances of finding a random crack and finding a way out might not be as good as the chances of surviving in that place. Lu Xiaoyi ignored him. He knew that this person was reminding him that the future might be more difficult than he imagined, but he didn't really regret this trip. If he wanted to go out, he could have made it when Lu Xi attacked. The biggest change in cultivation for humans was that there were things to do and things not to do. Indeed, the probability of being discovered was not small. But at the same time, because this was a trip with no return, it was possible that they would choose an estranged cultivator to carry out the mission, and not send out the true potential confidant of their own force. Most importantly, they were still Jin Dan. Jin Dan belonged to the middle and lower levels of the cultivation pyramid. They were objects that could be changed and changed. To a large cultivation domain, killing one or two Jin Dan from another domain was meaningless. It was far more useful to keep them alive. Therefore, there was still a chance. Another crucial point was that they believed in karmic luck. Their karmic luck was on the higher side compared to cultivators of the same level. Therefore, they didn't believe that they would die in this adventure. How could it be possible to know some secrets without taking risks? Chapter 693. Traveling in the universe was boring. The only thing that was more boring than flying in the universe was traveling through the cracks in space because there was not even starlight to be seen. The only good news was that there were two companions. At least there was someone to talk to, even if both of them were top gene Dan cultivators with strong willpower and extraordinary endurance. Neither of them said that they would continue traveling together, but in terms of movement, either of them moved alone. That would be meaningless. When it came to choosing a route, the opinions of both of them had to be considered thoroughly. Most importantly, they had to guard against those unstable cracks. Once they encountered one, they had to consider if they should turn back because the sudden change in the crack was the only way to separate them. Their experience was gradually enriched by the stumbling. Regarding space, at least on the surface, both of them understood more and more. On this point, Lu Xiaoyi was not as good as Qin Xian. This was the advantage of being a descendant of orthodox Taoism. When they were familiar with everything and had the guidance of fate, at least in terms of mentality, they were completely different from those headless flies. When traveling through the cracks in space, the biggest risk was not the crack itself, but the endless running around in circles with no hope. Day after day, year after year, even a cultivator with a strong spirit would collapse in the end. He would become more and more desperate and anxious, affecting his judgment and making the wrong decision. However, if there was a goal, a route, and companions, even if they were the companions of an enemy, everything would be different. It would be just like a super long journey. However, there was no scenery. During the flight, both of them cultivated separately unless there was a fork in the road. However, this situation was not always certain. Sometimes, they would change directions more than 10 times in a day. Sometimes, a straight path could take them a year. Lu Xiaoyi's 5 elements and Qin Xian's yin and yang could not be cultivated in this place because there was no environment to support it. The most suitable direction for the state of Tao here was space. Unfortunately, both of them had not started. Qin Xian cultivated inner techniques while Lu Xiaoyi cultivated the pan sword. They were busy with their own things and had nothing to do with each other. In the cracks in space, cultivators would try to avoid fighting as much as possible because doing so would affect the stability of the crack space. Once they were thrown to another place by the crack space, it would be a wasted trip. Therefore, it was a principle to restrain oneself as much as possible. For Lu Xiaoyi, he had to use at least one flying sword before reaching his destination because the swordsman he killed was of the pan sword's orthodoxy. This would give him an extra bargaining chip to survive. At least on the surface, he could pass off the fake as genuine. Why did the orthodoxy of the sword disc appear in the blue sky Thousand Island domain 10,000 years ago? This could be a mystery that could never be solved. He didn't think that the conspiracy started more than 10,000 years ago. Such a plan was meaningless to those below the level of supremacy. All the participants would die of old age in the plan. It was more like a self-published biography. The 10,000-year plan was exclusive to the immortals and had nothing to do with them. He could only assume that there was more than one sword plate inheritance in the countless universes. Just like there was more than one inner sword inheritance, the outer sword case was even more common. 3 years later, Qin Xian suddenly felt the presence of some kind of Tao state around her. She sighed in her heart. This swordsman was still improving. She had no idea what kind of secret technique he had mastered. As time passed, it would be harder to deal with him. Lu Xiaoyi had finally quelled the 4 seasons into a mustard seed. For this, he had used 11 years. He needed to familiarize himself with the sword disc for a period of time before he could decide whether to put it into his dantian. Or put it into his unprecedented Niwen palace? Or put it into his lower Dantian? That would be even more dangerous. The sword would be sent out in the blink of an eye. He was in a good mood and his mind worked faster. He suddenly asked, "How many years have we been in the crack?" Qin Xian answered, 3 years and 67 days. Lu Xiaoyi replied, "Do you still remember the evil charm? We were all invited here because of it. We only found its trace at the end of the crack shrinking. What do you think?" Qin Xian knew that he must have thought of something. "It's a very magical ability. It can seize control of a cultivator in an instant. In the ancient books of the Three Pure Ones, such a soul is called the soul-borrowing body. In the cultivation world, it's called the evil charm. This thing comes and goes without a trace. It's impossible to guard against it, but it's not omnipotent. Its strength lies in its sudden ability to seize the soul and control the body, but it doesn't have any attack power. This is the restriction of the Great Way. The condition for the evil charm to succeed in its soul-borrowing body is that the person whose soul is borrowed must have a much lower spiritual power than the evil charm, or the cultivator must be in a state of panic. It can't be seized at any time and anywhere." Lu Xiaoyi listened quietly. What he was thinking about was not this kind of technical problem, but the Three Pristine's involvement in this field was indeed not something the sword range could compare to. They had a deep understanding of almost all the strange objects in the world that they did not know. Qin Xian continued. At that time, there were 3 suspicious people among the stowaways. They were all people with active fate energy and were also our targets. The reason why the 2 of us chose the strongest 2 was because it would be easier to deal with the weakest one. This gave Xia Mei a chance to take care of him. The weakest one was returning to the crack. In the panic of the sudden attack, it was easy for the evil charm to take advantage of it. "What do you mean?" Lu Xiaoyi pondered and said, "Your analysis is perfect. But I'm thinking about its motive. Why did it choose to attack this person? At that time, the crack was very chaotic and there were countless casualties. If it only wanted to find a body to go to the land of exile, then the exiled cultivators should be its best target. Their spiritual power was weaker, and they would definitely try to find a way to return to the land of exile. But it didn't do that. It gave up the easiest target group to achieve its goal, but took control of the third person in the depths of the crack under our noses. There must be a special reason." Qin Xian's brain turned quickly. He understood a little. "You mean, when this guy was outside, it didn't want to stay to help the stowaways inside, but it was the opposite?" Lu Xiaoyi smiled. "We thought that the evil charm kept attacking the cultivators in the land of exile because it wanted to buy time for its companions in the crack and distract the indigenous people. This is only from the point of view of the cultivators in the land of exile. From the point of view of us outsiders, it might be that the evil charm didn't do it on purpose. It wanted to attract the attention of the indigenous people, strengthen the defense, and increase the manpower. In fact, the land of exile did the same. So, the truth might be that the evil charm had a grudge against these stowaways. At least, it had a grudge against some of them." Chapter 694. Qin Xian agreed and added, "Among the stowaways, there are generally 2 groups. One group is the stowaways who have formed a formation. They have the same orthodoxy and work well together. One look and you can tell that they are from the same sect. The ability to expand space should be their method. The other 3 should be another group. Even the orthodoxies of these 3 people are very different. There are swordsmen and dharma cultivators. They should be from different sects. They formed a group at the last minute to carry out a mission. Their mission should be to sneak into the exile land. They don't care what method they use. They can fight their way out, they can also submit to the ants. But they didn't expect the other group to have the ability to expand space. This caused a change in their mission." Lu Xiaoyi laughed. "They don't believe that the expanded space will shrink back. Since that group of orthodoxies hid it from them once, they can hide it from them a second time. So while everyone else is moving forward, the three of them are retreating. They know that even if they are trapped in the space crack, they still have a way out. Qing Xian snorted. But the ones who have a grudge with the evil spirit must be these three people. Or maybe it's the power behind these three people? When the evil spirit sees the two of us fighting, of course it will take the opportunity to pick up the weak ones. It doesn't care if it can leave the crack because it knows very well that as long as it borrows the soul of any one of these three people, it will definitely be able to leave and go home. For more than 3 years, the two of them thought about the changes in the space crack again and again. Finally, they found the most important clue from a pile of messy clues. Things started to become clear. But it wasn't over yet. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. This thing must be like us, rushing back. This is actually the reason why it must possess one of the three people's bodies. Qing Xian laughed evilly. The evil spirit's ability to borrow souls is limited. If it encounters a battle, it can only rely on the cultivator it takes over. If the body it takes over is strong, it's strong. If it takes over a weak one, it's nothing. It's the same for escaping. With our speed, we will definitely be in front of it. For the sake of safety, it must be following behind us at a leisurely pace to ensure that it won't bump into us. Lu Xiaoyi concluded. So, we only need to find the only path of providence to guide us. In the spatial crack, there were thousands of cracks. In most cases, there was more than one passage that was guided by luck. They had seen more than 100 cracks in front of them that were guided by luck, which meant that they were all connected and would lead to the same destination. However, there would occasionally be unexpected situations. For example, they had encountered 2 such situations in the past 3 years. There was only a single crack in front of them, and they had no choice but to take this path. This was the best time to set up an ambush. If he was really blocked from the front and back, he would be like a rat in a bellows, with nowhere to run. After the two of them had made up their minds, they sped up. A year later, they finally encountered a one-way slit that was guided by Providence. At this gathering point, more than 10 slits gathered together and spread out in front of them. However, only one of them was guided by Providence. Judging from the strength of their Providence, this was the only way back. This is it, Qing Xian suggested. I know more about this evil spirit and can guarantee that I can hide my breath at a certain distance. Then I'll find a random crack to hide in here. You follow the slit that is guided by Providence and walk forward. Be careful not to get too close and walk further away. We don't know how far it can see, but it'll be fine as long as it doesn't diverge again. The two of them decided on their strategy and went their separate ways. The crack returned to its peaceful state. Time passed slowly. 1 month, 3 months, a year had passed. There was no movement at all. However, this amount of time was nothing to Jin Dan cultivators who had lived for hundreds of years, especially when it concerned their safety. The two of them understood that even if they had to wait here for 10 years, it would be worth it. Since this evil spirit was likely to come from that mysterious and powerful world, then it must know a lot about that place. If they could get all this information from it, it would be of great significance to their future actions. It would no longer be a blind man riding a blind horse in the middle of the night. This was the meaning of catching the evil spirit. After another half a year, a breath faintly appeared. It carefully poked its head out from one of the cracks and carefully searched this gathering point, not letting go of any suspicious signs. A few days later, a cultivator flew out and stood there, carefully observing the exit in front. His appearance was ordinary, but the 2 tufts of mustache above his lips showed that this person was cautious and astute. After a while, he also knew that this gathering point was not a good place to stay. After a while, he made his choice and disappeared into one of the cracks in front. It was a crack that was not guided by Providence. The surroundings were still peaceful, and there was no trace of the hidden Qing Xian, as if it was a familiar sight. A month later, the breath of another cultivator came. Similarly, he carefully poked his head out and looked around. After confirming that there was no danger in the surroundings, he appeared at the gathering point. It was the cultivator with a mustache who appeared last time. This time, he did not hesitate but quickly went into one of the cracks and quickly moved forward. After a few moments, Qin Xian's figure appeared from one of the cracks and laughed. He had been in the cultivation world for hundreds of years. How could such a small trick be hidden from him? The mustache man flew forward at full speed, because it was easy to encounter people like this through the cracks of Providence. He did not care about the others, but the two unfamiliar cultivators made him very afraid. He came from an extremely distant world, which was also the so-called first world among the countless worlds in the countless universes. At least, that was what his own people in the world thought, and he was also a part of it. That was what he knew in the past, but he did not think so now. This was a humiliating past. As an experimental body, he became this disgusting appearance that was neither human nor ghost, and there was no possibility of turning back. Originally, he had been imprisoned in a small bottle for his entire life. He was a specimen that was studied and dissected by others. His master would take him out and play with him when he was free, but most of his time was spent in the dark bottle. As a soul, he had to endure endless humiliation. But he was tolerant enough, obedient enough, ignorant, harmless, and not very intelligent. He hid his ability deeply, waiting for the day when he could escape. Opportunity always favors those who do not give up. Or so. He found an opportunity, and when his master was not paying attention, he plunged into the crack of space. The crack that his master created for other purposes, and only here, he could really avoid his master, that devil's search. Then, he would wander endlessly in the crack. The space crack that was terrifying to humans was nothing to him, and could even be regarded as a wonderful journey. As a soul that had stayed in the bottle for hundreds of years, what was a crack to him? At least he could fly freely, and occasionally meet interesting people. Chapter 695. Of course, it would take revenge. It would take revenge on all those who had wronged it. It was already in this state, so why should it care about Dao Heart? It would just take revenge. It could not take revenge on the real culprit. The difference in their levels was too great, so it would take revenge on its master's subordinates. It would destroy all its master's plans, as long as it could do it. This was its only motivation to continue living. Since it was forced to escape into the spatial crack, it had been following these three cultivators. They were helping its master, so they were its enemies. Furthermore, they were all in the Jin Dan realm, so it was just right. It had always wanted to use its ability to take control of one of their bodies, but it was very difficult. The swordsman and the spell cultivator were very powerful, so it could not suppress them with its spiritual energy. Only the spell cultivator had a chance, but this required an opportunity. It had to ensure that it would not be discovered after it took over the body, or else it would be useless. In the end, it had followed them all the way from its hometown to the place of exile. Just as Lu Xiaoyi and the other had deduced, it had run out, and caused trouble outside so that the three of them could not achieve their goal. What they wanted to do was what it wanted to stop. It had taken a risk to take over the last body. It was very clear that if it did not take the risk, the last cultivator would be killed very quickly. Then, it would have no body to take over, and it would not be able to return to its hometown to continue its revenge. It was very afraid of these two unfamiliar cultivators, a fear that came from the depths of its soul. It did not dare to go near them, not to mention take over their bodies. It did not even dare to think about it. An evil spirit like it could only target those who were lacking in their state of mind, insufficient spiritual energy, and weak willpower. For these two people, their willpower was as strong as steel, their spiritual energy vast and pure, and their state of mind clear and bright. All souls would avoid such people. They were not people they could touch. This was the natural flaw of a soul. He could also vaguely guess that these two people were enemies of his home domain. If he could get the help of these two people, his journey of revenge would be easier. However, he did not have the capital to cooperate with them. An abnormal existence like him still felt inferior in front of real human beings. Furthermore, it did not know what they were thinking. What were their plans? Would they go on an adventure in a faraway place? Why would it pull them over? Its understanding of fate was very limited, and it was still at a very shallow stage. It did not know the real intentions of the top cultivators in its own domain, so it thought that it alone could not persuade these two cultivators to avenge it. It was also once a human, so it knew the attitude of human cultivators towards gratitude and grudges. It was impossible. He had to avenge himself. Along the way, it was very careful. The chances of bumping into other people in the spatial rift were very small, but if it was in a passage that was guided by luck, it might be different. Therefore, whenever it encountered such a solitary passage, it would subconsciously play a little trick. It was also in trouble. It did not know what was waiting for it on the other side of the crack. Would the major cultivators there find out about it? Just like that, he continued walking until he sensed an aura approaching from the front. Oh no, the presence of a human cultivator's aura in such a place was most likely a deliberate attempt to intercept it. Its cautious nature made it have no desire to fight at all. If it really fought, its entire body's abilities would be limited to that one leap. The rest would depend on the abilities of the possessed body. They were not strong to begin with, and under its control, their abilities would be reduced. How could it possibly win? Thus, it immediately retreated, quickly retreating without looking back. Fortunately, the aura behind it did not chase after it. Was it really a coincidence? However, its luck was mercilessly shattered when another aura appeared in front of it. It was obvious that the other party was targeting it. Who could it be? Even a deity might not be able to react so quickly and send someone to intercept it immediately after it did something bad. A familiar figure appeared in front of it. It was a spell cultivator with a graceful demeanor, gentle and elegant, without a trace of killing intent. However, it knew that this was an illusion. This spell cultivator had just smiled and ravaged the powerful cultivator from its hometown to death, unable to put up any effective resistance throughout the entire process. The aura behind it was also approaching. It did not need to look to know that it was the terrifying swordsman who had killed the swordsman from its hometown. How could these two people fight? I'll cooperate. I surrender. As long as you let me live, I'll do anything you want me to. The only advantage of becoming a soul was that it did not have to worry about its reputation. As a life form that had been in a bottle for hundreds of years, it had long forgotten what reputation was. We don't accept surrender. The spell cultivator's words were like the spring breeze, but this breeze was bone-chilling when it brushed against its body. But we accept partners. The swordsman's words pulled it out of the ice cellar. Tell us what you know. We will also tell you what we know. Then we will have a foundation for cooperation. Even if a soul is floating in the universe, it still needs friends. The spell cultivator's words made it realize something. We have wine. Do you have a story? The swordsman's words were always so philosophical. Shangqing Monastery, Qingxian. Greetings, fellow Taoist. I know that this is not your true form. However, we cultivators do not care about external appearances. We only look at the heart, so it doesn't matter. Xian Yuan cigarette butt. Greetings, fellow Taoist. Meeting was an accident, but we can be together for a long time. We have a common foundation and a common future. It felt a little sore in its eye sockets. Even if it had human consciousness, it knew that most of the time, what humans showed might not be what they thought in their hearts. It knew that humans were the most hypocritical existence among all living things. It knew that they were only saying this because they wanted to know some secrets about their own realm from it. It knew everything. But it was still moved. Because in the hundreds of years it had been a soul, not a single human had reported their name and origin to it. Whether it was Jean Dan Yuanying or the weak foundation establishment Qi refinement. They did not treat it as a person at all. It was not even an item. In their eyes, it could only see disgust and disdain. What did it do wrong to be treated like this? So even if it knew that this could be a lie, it was still a lie between humans. They treated it as a person. So even if they were lying to it, it would gladly endure it. At least it proved that it still had value to exist. As for the details of its own realm, it did not care at all. You may think that we are lying to you and will abandon you after getting what we want. But what I want to tell you is that the beginning of a lie does not necessarily mean the end of a lie. There may be other changes. Qin Xian guided it patiently. No one will lie for the sake of lying. When the number of lies decreases and the number of truths increases, you will realize that taking away deception from life is like taking away sunlight from life. Lu Xiaoyi was always so literary. You don't have to say any more. What do you want to know? I will tell you everything I know. Chapter 696. The three of them sat in a circle and listened to a sad story. The sword cultivator and Dharma cultivator behaved naturally, but the demonic spirit was a little uneasy. Beside the two of them, the heavy pressure made it not dare to have any other thoughts. Qin Xian was obviously aware of this. After a greeting, the two of them retracted their aura and became normal. Only then did the demonic spirit heave a sigh of relief. It was very curious. Among the three of them, who was the demonic spirit? My Taoist name is Yu Hu. I'm a cultivator of the Soul Return sect, a small sect in the Zhou Xian Upper Realm. The Zhou Xian Upper Realm is the boundary that you're going to. We'll talk about this later. The Soul Return sect is a small sect. Their Taoist teachings specialize in soul separation, external release, and cultivation. Of course, they also involve some soul control techniques. But please believe me when I say that the people in my sect rarely use such techniques. Everyone's body is their greatest treasure. Unless it's absolutely necessary, no one is willing to give up their own body to take over someone else's. Even if someone else's body is better, it's meaningless if it's not a perfect fit. Our Taoist teachings use souls the most to save people. Those who have lost their souls, lost their memories, or suffered mental damage. So even though our sect is not big, we can still survive. Everyone gives us face. That year, I was over 300 years old. I had some potential in Jean Dan and was considered an elite disciple in the sect. So I was a little unrestrained in my actions. Don't get me wrong, I just wanted to be carefree. I didn't want to do whatever I wanted. In the Zhou Xian Upper Realm, there were countless sections I didn't dare to be too unrestrained. The Soul Return sect needed the ghost in essence. This was the most important medium to perfectly control the power of the soul. It was often hidden deep underground, so one had to go very deep to find it. This was also the main purpose of the disciples of the Soul Return sect. That year, my master, junior sister, and I went out to look for good quality ghost in essence. Unexpectedly, we found it in an underground cave and obtained the best quality marrow. It was the first time I've seen it in my life, and it was also unheard of in the sect. It was extremely helpful for future cultivation. Unfortunately, the quantity was a little small, so it was a little awkward to share it between two people. Both of them were very good listeners. Their gazes were filled with sympathy and sincerity. Their understanding was also filled with encouragement. Under such gazes, Yu Hu wished that he could tell them everything he knew to thank them. Although he used to be a human, it was too long ago after all. He didn't know that the shamelessness of human beings was becoming more and more limitless in the evolution of cultivation. Lu Xiaoyi passed him a pot of wine, fulfilling his promise to compliment the wine. Qin Xian, on the other hand, put up a shield for the three of them to prevent any possible spying from afar. Even though it was a bit like taking off one's pants to fart, it was also a form of concern. Of course, with the three pure ones' abilities in sorcery, This kind of shield also had the small function of preventing the spirit from leaving. This was not something that ordinary people could understand. Junior's sister had some ideas. And she caught me off guard and restrained me. Of course, I'm not stupid. I countered her at the same time. That's not important. What's important is that both of us temporarily lost the ability to move. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled and said, "Why is fellow Taoist Yu Hu being so secretive? The path of cultivation is all about fighting. If you want something, you have to take the initiative to take it. What's there to be embarrassed about? Look at Brother Qin Xian. For the sake of fighting for treasures, he snatched Master's opportunity. There's nothing great about that." Qin Xian was so angry that his teeth itched. When did he snatch Master's opportunity? Not to mention Master, he had never even touched the opportunity of his fellow disciples. However, since it was a crucial moment to dispel the suspicions of this evil spirit, it wasn't good to tear each other down. Other than acquiescing, he couldn't refute. However, when it came to framing others, he also knew how to do it. As a man, if you have ideas, then you have ideas. If you snatch, then you snatch. What's there to hide? Take this swordsman, for example. Not to mention snatching the elders, he would snatch the youngers as well. As long as he has his eyes on something, there's nothing that he won't snatch. Therefore, since we're together, there's no need to be secretive. There's nothing to hide. Yu Hu's heart skipped a beat. Fortunately, he was a strand of soul, so there was nothing to snatch. Otherwise, how could he be in a good situation now? Fellow Taoists, you are both men of character, heroes, and real men. I'm not as good as you. At that time, my junior sister and I couldn't move at all. We were entangled with each other, and our magic power and spirit were intertwined. We couldn't take care of anything else. Coincidentally, there was a huge oil stalactite brewing above our heads. Because of our magic power surging, a hole was opened. Just like that, droplets of oil dripped down. After more than 10 days, our bodies were covered in this stalactite oil, just like a huge amber. My junior sister and I had similar skills and techniques, so we couldn't do anything to each other. In the end, we perished together. However, before I died, I gathered the last of my spirit power and transferred it to the strand of netherine essence. It was because of this strand of netherine essence that even after my death, my spirit persisted for thousands of years. In the end, I mutated into this evil spirit, which is neither human nor ghost. This is the power of cultivation. If it were another orthodoxy, they wouldn't be able to do this. Qin Xian praised. It's also the power of perseverance. If it were another person, they might not have as strong a will as you. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. In the words of the two, Yu Gu seemed to be a hero. In fact, he thought so too. If it were another person, their body and spirit would have been destroyed long ago. Who would be like him, who could use another method to obtain immortality? The entire region of Zhou couldn't understand him. He didn't expect that the first people to understand him would be two outsiders. He couldn't help but feel that he knew them. I was buried in the cave for thousands of years. There was no light and I couldn't get out of the layer of amber that surrounded me. In fact, with my special condition, even if I did get out, as long as I saw the light, I would disappear into nothingness. Then I met my benefactor, who was also my savior in life. He was a perfected lord and he found this piece of amber by chance. Of course, he also found me. He was a kind person. He used his magic power to bind the amber into a mustard seed and let me out while maintaining the amber's original state. Because of the amber's existence, I wasn't afraid of sunlight. Those 100 years were the happiest time of my life. I followed him to travel the world and the universe. I saw how things had changed and how the soul return sect had declined in the cultivation world. Until one day, the perfected lord met his enemy. In the end, after a battle, the perfected lord's Tao disappeared and I became someone else's trophy. This was also the beginning of my disaster. For hundreds of years, I tasted the bitterness and sorrow of human time and was studied as a ghost. I pretended to be stupid. I pretended to be an evil spirit that was born from heaven and earth and hid my past as a human. As for you, you were the first people that I told the truth to after I became an evil spirit. Can I trust you? Lu Xiaoyi and Qin Xian looked at each other and said in unison, Your secret is our secret. We won't let anyone else hear it in this lifetime. Chapter 697. P.S. Can you get 4,000 votes this month? A cultivator's promise was not an empty promise made by a mortal. Yu Gu's sincerity had won the trust of the two cunning fellows. The atmosphere started to lighten up. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. I'm guessing it's definitely not junior sister? Qin Xian pretended to be curious. Then what else is there? Senior sister-in-law? Senior sister? Yu Gu was not embarrassed. He had experienced more embarrassing words than this countless times. Why would he care about these two people's kind teasing? This is my personal secret. I won't tell you. We respect the privacy of our friends. A cultivator without privacy is not perfect. Even if it's something that can't be said. Qin Xian raised her cup in respect. My sect has some understanding of the various borrowing of souls. There are many types of souls that exist independently in this world. Among them is fellow Taoist Yu Gu's type. I know that what I'm about to say is a bit disrespectful and may be a bit too much, but since we want to be friends who trust each other, then there are some things that I have to say first. Fellow Taoists, can you show us that piece of amber so that we ignorant people can broaden our horizons? There were many souls, but most of those that existed in the cultivation world were naturally mutated species. They had different origins and each had their own mysteries. A large portion of them were not friendly to humans. They were a group that humans had always been wary of. This was completely different from the souls formed by humans. Human souls might want to take revenge, but their target would only be a certain person, a certain power, or at most a certain realm. They would never take revenge on the entire human race. This was because they were actually one of the many ways that humans existed. This was different from the different types of souls that were naturally formed in the universe. This kind of thing that was formed in the universe was a different species from humans. They were opposing and could not be reconciled. This was the difference in nature. Therefore, Qin Xian's meaning was that Yu Gu had to let them know his true origins. They could not just believe whatever he said. In the end, they would get along with each other only to end up helping a different race in the universe. This was a normal suspicion. It was also the cornerstone for both sides to understand each other. The origins of the two humans were very clear. As for Yu Gu, he was only a story to accompany the wine until now. Yu Hu was also once a human, especially someone like him who studied soul orthodoxies. He knew very well what humans were truly afraid of. Therefore, it was not unreasonable for these two to make such a request. But he had misgivings. In front of these two powerful cultivators whose strength far exceeded his, it didn't matter whether he revealed his secret or not. What he was worried about was other aspects. Since they were going to cooperate in the future Zhou world, they must have a basic understanding of each other. Otherwise, they would not be helping each other. They would only be helping each other out. Lu Xiaoyi stepped forward and gave a simple introduction on the use of fate. Only then did Yu Hu understand why these two were willing to take such a risk and travel hundreds of millions of miles to an unfamiliar world. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi was not stupid enough to say everything. At least, from what he said, the 5 rings were a solid piece of iron. He and Qin Xian were close comrades who had gone through life and death together. They had a strong background supporting them. This was something that he had to emphasize. Otherwise, it would be easy for others to lose their confidence. We are not here to kill and burn. I'm telling you the truth, we are not here to avenge you. We are merely 3 Jin Dan cultivators. We are going to seek revenge from a high-level perfected lord. Do you believe me? Yu Hu nodded. Of course, he understood that this was the truth. Qin Xian continued. But there are many ways to take revenge. Killing is not the only way. We can also destroy their plans and spread their intentions. We can create chaos and suspicion in the Zhou Xian upper realm and so on. We have enough time to think about it. The prerequisite is that we have to survive first. So, fellow Taoist Yu Hu, can you control your hatred? Yu Hu smiled malevolently. These 3 people, I have followed them all the way. Nearly 10 years. I have held myself back and did not make a move until the moment you guys made your move. Don't worry, no one knows patience better than me. In the amber, I endured for thousands of years. In the bottle, I endured for hundreds of years. This is why I have the freedom I have now. For this rare freedom, I can endure anything. Chapter 698. Let's talk about the Zhou Xian upper realm. What kind of realm is it? What are the top sects? Is it the star region they control? The rules of conduct of the cultivation world? The way of doing things? Don't worry, tell us bit by bit. We have all the time in the world. You don't have to worry about the journey either. We'll take care of all the troubles for you. You just have to focus on telling us the story. Yu Gu took a deep breath. He knew very well that when he started to talk about the Zhou Xian upper realm, he had completely cut off all ties with this realm. However, he did not regret it. He was now just a wandering soul that was only focused on revenge. He no longer had a home. The Zhou Xian upper realm is known as the #1 realm among the 10,000 realms. Don't laugh, at least that's what they think. Moreover, many of the nearby universes do indeed respect the Zhou Xian upper realm. This is not purely empty talk. In the Zhou Xian upper realm, the distribution of power is very clear. There are no mid-sized powers or sections. There are only the 9 upper sects and 3,000 unorthodox sections. My previous orthodoxy, the sole returning sect, was one of the 3,000 unorthodox sects. There is one difference. The Zhou Xian upper realm is not a complete realm. In fact, it's more like a nebula. Nebula? Then, could it also be understood as a union of many domains? If that's the case, how do the mid- and low-level cultivators solve their transportation problems? Or do they live their own lives? Qin Xian was very curious. The current 5 rings was different from the cultivation education 10,000 years ago. Cultivators would receive basic knowledge of the universe and the stars during the Jin Dan stage. Because the 5 rings were constantly fighting outside, there were many places that required the Jin Dan stage to guard. A certain level of knowledge was necessary. Yu Gu shook his head. You don't understand what I mean. What I mean is that the Zhou Xian upper realm is not a complete realm. Instead, it is made up of more than 3,000 continents of various sizes. They are 3-dimensional spheres. What separates the continents is not the sea of the normal realm, nor the stars of the universe, but a sea of clouds. Of course, mid- and low-level cultivators can travel freely. Mortals can also use large flying ships to go to other continents, as long as they can pay the price. Because in the sea of clouds, there is also the existence of qi. Lu Xiaoyi began to understand. What you mean is that in a nebula-like realm like the Zhou Xian upper realm, the continents are actually 3-dimensional and staggered. The distance between them is not as far apart as the celestial bodies in a real nebula, so the atmosphere fills the entire domain nebula? Yu Gu nodded. That's right. It is described as a nebula, but it is not a real nebula. The position of the stars in the nebula in the universe is too far away. It looks like a cloud from afar, but when you look closer, the distance between them is too great. It is impossible for so much atmosphere to fill it. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Go on, he's a fool. My brain is used to looking at 2D drawings, but when it comes to 3D drawings, my brain can't handle it. Yu Hu laughed dryly. It's my fault. If I don't interact with others, my words won't be too appropriate. Every continent was a Tao orthodoxy. For example, my original soul return sect occupied one of the continents that was several thousand miles in size. It had a population of 10 million, and it was able to pass down its legacy. More than 3,000 continents were basically of the same size, which formed the 3,000 side doors. Because of the population base and resources, they will always be side doors. However, there are 9 divine mountains that cannot be compared to ordinary continents. The continents that each divine mountain is located on are at least 10,000 miles in diameter, with a population of over 1 trillion. They are rich in resources and have outstanding people. Thus, they gave birth to 9 upper sects. They are Huangting Taoism, Supreme Mystery Middle Yellow Temple, Thousand Buddhas Pilgrimage, Free and Unfettered Travel, Qingwei Immortal Sect, Myriad Evolutions Fortune Gate, Bitter Zen Temple, Primeval Cave True Mountain, Human Sect. Lu Xiaoyi clicked his tongue and said, "That sounds really high and mighty. However, I have a question. Why is there no Swordsman's Mountain?" Yu Hu replied, "The sword vein actually exists in the Zhou Upper Realm, but it is not part of the Divine Mountains, nor is it part of the 9 upper sects. There are many such orthodoxies among the side doors. As far as I know, there are no less than 10 swordsman orthodoxies. The swordsman that you killed was from one of them, the 7-color sword sect." Qin Xian laughed. "I told you, this Zhou upper realm has some foresight. He knows that the sword vein is too extreme and can't be shown in public. Look, just from the names, they are all orthodox Taoists." Lu Xiaoyi glanced at him. "Do you believe that if the 2 of us are found to be spies from the 5th ring, and they want to kill the chicken to warn the monkey, you will definitely be that chicken?" Yu Hu hurriedly tried to smooth things over. No, the 2 of you are monkeys, I am that chicken." This was a realm that was ruled by pure Taoists. To be honest, there were not many realms like this left. Buddhism was the most permeable, and their system was also the most suitable to pass down their beliefs among the ordinary people. However, what was going on here? Was the Taoists too strong and unable to interfere? Qin Xian, on the other hand, saw deeper. The 9 upper sects have never changed since time immemorial. How can a cultivation realm like this develop? No competition, no challenge, no survival of the fittest, no sense of danger. How can they maintain their position as number 1? By holding Dharma conferences? Yu Hu laughed. Fellow Taoist Qin Xian, your question is too profound. I can't answer it. In my life, I have spent most of my time either in amber or in a bottle, so my knowledge is lacking. However, you are right about one thing. Isn't there a lot of Dharma conferences in the Zhou upper realm? There are Dharma conferences almost every year, and they are so annoying. Lu Xiaoyi laughed as well. Brother Yu, you are too polite. Although your knowledge is lacking, you have lasted for a long time. This battle lasted for thousands of years, and I think this record is unprecedented. If there is a chance in the future, I will write a complete encyclopedia of the universe's cultivation mysteries, and I will definitely include your deeds in it. Yu Hu was very embarrassed. I think we shouldn't do that. It would be an insult to our ancestors. However, Qin Xian was not joking. Her questions were all technical. A spherical nebula realm is formed by more than 3,000 continents, and they are intertwined with each other. They are separated by a sea of clouds, and cultivators can cross them. Is that what it means? Yu Hu nodded. That is basically the case. However, there is one point. The continents are not mixed together, and there is a certain regularity. The 9 upper sects are the outermost layer, the surface layer of the sphere. This is also the biggest reason for their continents. There is another point. If one wants to go out into the void of the universe, all cultivators must pass through the sky of the upper sects. Only their sky is connected to the universe. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. All right, we can use this to collect the void of the universe. Then, Are there any divisions between the 9 upper sects and the 3,000 minor sects? Do they have underlings? Or are they scattered sand? Yu Hu laughed. Of course they have their own divisions. However, the situation in the Zhou-Xian upper realm is very complicated. Many of the minor sects actually have more than one sect master. Yes, for small forces, it would be safer to cling to more thighs. Chapter 699. The Zhou-Xian upper realm gradually became clearer as Yu Gu introduced it. Without a doubt, this was a very different realm. Just from the shape of the landscape, it was so different. It was a bit like, 3,000 flying peaks. And it was an enlarged version, a strengthened version. Xian Yuan had used all his strength, and relied on the immortals to create a floating hill on Mount E. Here, there were 3,000 of them, and the largest one was 100,000 miles wide. There were dozens of them that could fit tens of thousands of miles of the northern region, and there were as many as 9 of these huge continents. Adding them all together, it was already more than the size of the 5th ring, right? The 5th ring was just a realm in the traditional sense, but here, it was 3-dimensional. When placed together, it was obvious who was better and who was worse. I have a question. If it's a small continent in the nebula, then where does their sunlight come from? It can't penetrate at all. The clouds are so thick, or is there another way of light? Lu Xiaoyi finally asked a technical question, but it was beyond Yu Gu's intelligence. I don't know. Actually, I rarely go out of the realm. In the past, I focused on cultivation, but later on, I was imprisoned by someone. Qin Xian was much more serious. Let's get down to business, don't talk about those useless things. When you reach the Zhou-Xian upper realm and are still alive, you'll have plenty of time to figure out these questions. Yu Gu, did you sneak into the crack from the Zhou-Xian upper realm? Yu Gu nodded. Yes. I entered from the Taishan central yellow realm. At that time, there were a few perfected lords present. I took advantage of my master's unpreparedness to find an opportunity. You also know that where there are cracks in space, the fluctuations of spiritual vigor are more chaotic. Qin Xian stared at him closely. Are cracks in space very common in the Zhou-Xian upper realm? From what I know, those relatively stable realms rarely have cracks in space. It's easy to cause instability in the realm. Yu Gu explained. The Zhou-Xian upper realm is a little different. I can't explain the specific reasons. You know that my orthodoxy doesn't involve space, and I've been imprisoned for so many years. I can only answer you based on my impression and experience. The Zhou-Xian upper realm had a very deep understanding of the Tao of space, especially when it came to spatial rifts. This was also the reason why they could use the Fate Finger to complete the spatial rifts. In fact, there was no unstable crack left behind by nature in the Zhou-Xian upper realm. The crack was on a subordinate star outside the Zhou-Xian upper realm. The cultivators of Zhou-Xian had used their profound spatial knowledge to artificially establish a man-made rift system in the upper realm of Zhou-Xian. Externally, it was connected to the natural rifts of nature, and internally, it was connected to all 3,000 continents. In fact, it was used as a spatial teleportation within the realm. However, the ingenuity of this method lies in the fact that the teleportation channel requires spiritual vigor to maintain. Since the fissure network is connected to the natural fissure, it can borrow the power of nature. Therefore, there is no need for additional spiritual vigor input. If the middle and low-level cultivators want to quickly pass through the sea of clouds on the various continents, using the fissure network is much faster than flying on their own. Lu Xie sighed. Very clever. A perfect high-speed passage. Although the great cultivators can't enter, why would they need to rely on the fissure to move? Continue, tell me the specific situation when you sneaked in. For example, the 3 people who carried out the mission, are their identities in the hands of others? As long as we show our faces and see Qin Xian, we will immediately know that he is a spy. Yugu laughed. That's exactly what I wanted to say. If we would be exposed the moment we show our faces, I wouldn't have suggested that you go to the Zhou Xian upper realm. It's obviously a suicide mission. You might as well find another opportunity in the spatial rifts. If you are lucky, you might even find a suitable exit. However, the key to sending people to die is secrecy. Not only is it kept secret from the enemy, but more importantly, it is kept secret from your own people. Secrets are often leaked by insiders. Before this, I didn't know about the 5 rings of sky, and you also didn't know about the Zhou Xian upper realm. However, this is only because our realms are not high enough. If we become perfected lords, and each orthodoxy has half immortals or even higher patriarchs, I'm afraid that the existence of both sides won't be able to be kept a secret. The 5 rings' great cultivators definitely know about Zhou Xian, and the enemies of Zhou Xian's great cultivators know about the 5 rings. In other words, there is a possibility of spies being planted in each other. Lu Xiaoyi expressed his agreement. That's a good analysis. Yu Gu continued. Zhou Xian wants to send Jin Dan to Sky. This is a top secret in itself, and not many people know about it. More importantly, because they are sending Jin Dan, and considering Jin Dan's mediocre abilities, the safest thing to do is to not let them know more about the overall strategy. Therefore, there is no need for the great cultivators to teach and train these people. There is no need for that. The more they do, the more they will leak out. In the Zhou Xian upper realm, the 3,000 side groups have the obligation to cooperate with the 9 upper sects. Therefore, there are always Jin Dan or Yuanying on standby at all times. If the upper sects need them, they have to set off immediately to do those dirty, tiring, and dangerous tasks. This is a responsibility that cannot be avoided. Qing Xian snorted. Who would be willing? Yu Gu sighed. No one would be willing. However, you have no choice but to prepare. Therefore, every side group will have their cultivators take turns to be on duty. It will be changed every few years, and if you get caught up in it, you will be unlucky. When I was in the Soul Returning sect, I had such a duty. However, I was lucky that no one was sent to the upper sects during my 10 years of duty, so I managed to avoid it. In front of the crack in Taishian Middle Yellow, when the perfected lords decided to send people to Sky, it was completely a last-minute capture. They randomly selected 3 of the 3,000 side groups to be on duty as Jin Dan. They didn't even know what their names were or what their facial features looked like. They didn't even ask to meet them, but directly passed on the mission. Then, they were transferred into the natural crack in the outside world and sent to their destination. The advantage of doing this was that because they didn't have any contact with the upper realm cultivators in Zhou Xian, even if they were caught by the upper realm cultivators of Sky and searched their memories, they wouldn't be able to find out about Zhou Xian's arrangements. They would be able to keep Zhou Xian out of the matter and could only treat it as a coincidence in the crack. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. They are very cautious. The chess pieces were laid out casually without any trace of being chiseled. There was no trace of smoke or fire. However, what I find strange is, how did they determine the life and death of these cultivators who were sent out? And whether the ones who returned were the real people? Yu Gu explained. They used luck lanterns. Not soul lanterns. Since the 2 of you have swallowed their fate, then in their eyes, you are them, and they are you. Unless you bump into your old acquaintances from your respective sects, then there is a possibility of it being leaked. However, the possibility of this is not high, because the 3,000 side groups have always been wary of the 9 great sects' mysterious chatter. They don't dare to casually participate in it. It's fine if the cultivators they send out come back on their own, but if they don't come back, they don't dare to ask. Even if they are injured in battle, they are afraid that it will cause more trouble. Therefore, when I say that you guys go back, the possibility of not being discovered is actually higher. Chapter 700. Why does it sound so magical to me? Is everyone working together to welcome us back as spies? Yugu laughed. Fellow Taoist Yen, you're being too careful. The upper realm of cultivation has existed for hundreds of thousands of years and has never experienced an invasion. How strict do you expect them to be? Most importantly, their defenses have always been from top to bottom. Their defenses against unfamiliar perfected lords are the strictest, followed by Yuanying. When it comes to Jin Dan's level, how much of it will be left? To put it bluntly, what can you do even if you try to do it? Not to mention the 9 great divine mountains, even if it's the 3,000 unorthodox continents, which one can you change? It doesn't matter. In the eyes of the major cultivators, Jin Dan's presence is too insignificant, so insignificant that it's dispensable. It made sense. Under normal circumstances, for a place like Zhou Xian's upper realm, what's the point of sending a few Jin Dan here? Kill? Who can you kill? Destroy? What can you destroy? Even if you find out some information, how will you spread it? Fly by yourself? Even if you fly to your death, you might not be able to return home. Besides, Jin Dan can't enter the void. For Jin Dan spies, the biggest possibility for them to come here was to die of old age here. Thinking about it this way, it did seem to be the case. Would a tiger care about a few ants running into its territory? Qin Xian looked at the problem from another perspective. You just randomly found 3 Jin Dan spies and all of them have fate on them? Yu Gu shook his head. Don't talk to me about fate. I don't understand this thing. At least when I was still a human, I've never heard of such a thing. At least, I didn't have it back then. Lu Shi narrowed his eyes. There are only 2 possibilities. Either the major cultivators here have the means to give them fate in a short period of time, and they should have the ability to do so. After all, they can do it even in the distant blue sky. Or, all the cultivators here have fate. Don't worry, you'll find out eventually. When the time comes, you can swallow it to your heart's content. The small team of 2 became a small team of 3. The future seemed brighter, but also darker. They might have a chance to find out the truth, but the problem was, what could they do even if they knew? They couldn't spread the news. He couldn't fly back. Unless they could become upper realm true monarchs here. 1,000 years later? In order to relieve the loneliness of the journey, Lu Xiaoyi often made requests. Brother Yu, take out your amber again and let us see it. I won't mistreat you. I have a huge stack of erotic pictures here. You can take your pick. Yu Hu said hatefully. You'd better think more about yourself. Although the great cultivators wouldn't care too much about a small fish like you, at the very least, their orthodoxies would be compatible. The sword vein orthodoxies in the Zhou Xian upper realm are all sword plates, not a sword case like yours. It's fine if you don't use your sword, but once you do, you'll be exposed and drag everyone down with you. Qin Xian felt that this question was very important. Yu Gu is right. You must remove the sword sheath, and you must remove it as soon as possible so that you can get used to it. Don't argue with others before you get used to it. Be a coward for now. We'll talk about it when you've mastered the sword plate. Lu Xiaoyi didn't care. Coward? Was he still a swordsman? Don't I still have you guys? Yu Hu laughed dryly. I don't fight. I can't fight either. It's someone else's body, I'm not familiar with it. Qin Xian turned her head to the side. I'll say this first, I don't have time to care about your stupid business. When we reach the Zhou Xian upper realm, I think the 3 of us will go our separate ways. It'll be hard for us to work together, and it won't be safe either. If you're caught, bite us to death. Don't rat us out. Lu Xiaoyi snorted. Has there ever been a spy caught in the cultivation realm who didn't spill the beans in history? Since we'll definitely be found out, why don't you take the initiative to confess? That way, you'll suffer less. Yu Hu listened to them bicker, but he was actually happy. He hadn't interacted with other cultivators on equal terms for thousands of years. This was the respect he valued the most. Although he sometimes felt that these two people were reckless and unreliable, it didn't stop him from treating them as friends. If they didn't let him down, he would definitely not let them down. There were very few friends he could make, especially when he had the identity of an evil spirit. In a situation like this, he had his secrets, and they had their secrets too. Everyone had a common language and a common goal. These two people, one was calm and at ease, the other was joking and had bad breath. Their personalities were polar opposites, but he knew that these two were men of sacrifice. If they dared to come to the Zhou Xian upper realm, they would definitely go all out. He hoped that they would have good luck. Lu Xiaoyi knew that he had to make a decision. Originally, he wanted to consider more thoroughly, but the current situation didn't allow it. Before he reached the Zhou Xian upper realm, he had to have a sword disc in a state of attack. This was to prepare for any possible battles. Qing Xian didn't need to think so much because the Taoist techniques were always interlinked. When they were used, they were mostly the same, and there was no obvious difference. He only needed to listen to the names of the 9 so-called upper sects to know where their roots were. There wouldn't be any big mistakes. He had already made a decision on whether to place the sword disc in his dantian or in his Naiwen palace. How could he be willing to accept the fact that all his years of preparation turned out to be a product of the mainland? As for the difference between the dantian and the Naiwen palace, he didn't think that this would arouse the suspicion of the cultivators in the Zhou Xian upper realm. As long as it was a sword disc, as long as it was shot from within the body, everything else didn't matter. Which orthodoxy didn't have 1 or 2 mavericks? As for how to place the mustard seed of the sword disc into the Naiwen palace, he had been preparing for many years when he was at Mount Shao. It had been 1 or 2 years since the success of the 4-season sword. He had the prerequisites, and the only thing he lacked was determination. A few months later, the 3 of them came to an unstable space crack. According to Yu Hu, who had been there before, they decided to wait here for a while. They would continue their journey after the crack stabilized. This was a necessary precaution. The unstable space crack was their biggest enemy now. Once they fell into it, they wouldn't know where they would be when they came out. They would have to start all over again. This was something that no one wanted. Lu Xiaoyi found a relatively stable position and began the most crucial step in the modification of his flying sword. His flying sword system had never broken out of the framework of Xuanyuan's external swords. The flying sword and sword case formed the entirety of his combat power. The only difference between him and the other Xuanyuan's external swordsmen was the sword spirit, or perhaps the sword aura of Bo Langpa. This was an improvement to Xuanyuan's external sword system, not a change. Now, when he placed the flying sword into the mustard seed and placed it in his Naiwen sea of consciousness, it was hard to say what he would encounter. Of course, he couldn't use the scraping sword aura to form a sword like his Naiwen sword. However, he hoped that the flying sword in his Naiwen sea of consciousness could synchronize with his understanding of the Tao state. If he could do it, he would forever be free of the awkwardness of carving sword formations on his flying sword. Chapter 701. With the 4 seasons in front of him, Lu Xiaoyi communicated deeply with his sword's spirit to let it understand the meaning of entering the Naiwen Palace. Lu Xiaoyi reminded it again and again. Remember! Don't be stupid and don't throw a tantrum. You must keep the flying sword in the state of the sword plate. If you go crazy one day and shake the flying sword, I will have a long sword horn on my head. Then we will all be finished. This was a joke. In fact, the final form of the sword plate was completely controlled by him because it took him 11 years to form it with the power of the 5 elements. The sword spirit's role in it was secondary. After instructing, Lu Xiaoyi silently operated the 5 elements, and the 4 seasons rolled out of thin air. After 11 years of hard work, the process had become very fast. It was completed in the blink of an eye. It had shrunk into a sword plate. With another shake, it had transformed into a mustard seed, invisible to the naked eye. However, its existence was very clear in Lu Xiaoyi's spiritual consciousness. Under the attraction of the spiritual whirlpool, the mustard seed had moved into the Naiwen Palace and hung there quietly. This step was within Lu Xiaoyi's expectations. He had also formed the wave-fighting slope in his sea of consciousness before, so he was not completely inexperienced about it. The key was the second and third steps. The second step was to unsheathe the sword. Hiding the mustard seed in the Naiwen Palace was meaningless. What was meaningful was that this thing could enter and leave freely. Compared to the sword case flying sword, there was an additional procedure for unsheathing the sword plate. When the sword was unsheathed, it would stretch out, and when the sword was sheathed, it would coil up. The specific process was that when the master was about to unsheath the sword, the mustard seed would be controlled by divine thoughts and rush out from the top of the head. After leaving the body, it would immediately dispel the state of the sword plate and transform into a normal flying sword to attack the enemy. When the master wanted to keep the flying sword would return to the body. When it was close to the master, the sword plate would turn into a mustard seed and return to the Naiwen Palace. This additional procedure did not actually take up much time. It was just a transformation in flight, just like a car that transformed while running wildly. This required a certain degree of familiarity. As Qin Xian said, it would be too late to familiarize himself with it when he reached the upper realm of Zhou Xian. In an unfamiliar environment, he could encounter danger at any time. There was no time for him to familiarize himself with his swordsmanship. As expected, the mustard seed flew out and instantly bounced off. Lu Xiaoyi immediately realized the first advantage of the coiling sword, which was the most important indicator for a flying sword: initial speed. A powerful swordsman would try to minimize the speed of the flying sword as much as possible, which was why the flying sword appeared to be as fast as lightning in the eyes of an outsider. However, if one were to carefully measure the time it took for the flying sword to fly out of the scabbard to strike the opponent, and then to reach its maximum speed after it left the scabbard, this would take up a significant portion of the flying sword's speed. Most importantly, there was no way to avoid it. The closer the opponent was to the scabbard, the greater the proportion of the flying sword's speed. With Lu Xiaoyi's current speed, if his opponent was 3,000 feet away from him, he would almost collide with his opponent the moment he pushed his speed to the limit. In other words, the first 3,000 feet was a distance of acceleration from slow to fast. In terms of efficiency, it wasn't perfect. During the process of the coiling sword transforming from the mustard seed to the coiling sword, and extending it at the same time, because the coiling sword's body suddenly straightened, under the explosive power of the 5 elements, it would instantly give the flying sword a terrifying initial speed. This would greatly shorten the acceleration process of the flying sword. If his mastery of the coiling sword were to improve in the future, he might even be able to reach its maximum speed the moment the flying sword left the scabbard. This was extremely important to a swordsman. Based on the current changes, his maximum speed had been reduced from 3,000 feet to 100 feet. This meant that the time it took to hit the opponent had been reduced by a few percent. This was the unexpected benefit of the coiling sword. If you don't use it, you will never know. There were still many things that needed to be tested. How to control it, how to hide it, how to carry it, how to distribute it unevenly, how to add the 5 elements to it. These were all things that needed to be considered at the moment the sword left the scabbard. As for how to use the flying sword after it left the scabbard, it was no different from how he usually used the sword. He was very cautious. From slow to fast, from light to heavy, from simple to complicated, he gradually increased the load. At the same time, he constantly paid attention to whether the mustard seed entering and exiting the Naiwen would negatively affect his sea of consciousness. Whether it would cause baldness. The mustard seed entering and exiting the Naiwen would be a few orders of magnitude finer than pores. It probably wouldn't cause such an awkward situation. The second step was also very smooth. He wasn't sure if it was because of his own personal reasons. Or was it because of the sword spirit? Or was there some other reason that he couldn't think of for now that allowed the sword-coiling sword to enter and exit the Naiwen Palace so easily? If that was the case, why would other cultivators with sword-coiling sword choose the Dantian instead of the Naiwen Palace where it was easier to imbue spiritual energy? Based on his judgment, it was most likely because of the sword spirit. Without the sword spirit's actual control, the sword-coiling sword might go out of control in the mind. For a middle or low-level swordsman without a sword spirit, the Dantian was almost their only choice. At least in this place, the sword-coiling sword could still be nourished by mana. After a month, he was sure that the sword-coiling sword entering and exiting the Naiwen Palace was fine. There was only the third step left. He needed to find out if the various forces that he had comprehended, as well as whether the Tao state could be synchronized with the sword-coiling sword, as well as the growth of the sword-coiling sword in the sea of consciousness. These were all things that needed a long time to explore. Basically, the sword-coiling sword entering and exiting the Naiwen Palace was a success. However, there were also many problems that needed to be solved. How to choose between the 5 elements sword formation and the star sword formation. The sword disc in the mud ball was different from the sword case. It didn't allow sword spirit Su to switch between different sword discs. In order to fully utilize the characteristics of his sword formation system, he needed 7 universal sword discs. With his current 7 flying swords as the foundation, he would fuse with the top-grade materials, star materials, and 5 elements materials. Maybe in the future, he would have more Tao Realm swords. That was a story for later. Right now, what he needed to do was to familiarize himself with the 4 Seasons sword plate, while he also began to familiarize himself with the other flying swords. There was no time to waste. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to fully unleash his battle prowess. As for the other 2 who were not far away, Yu Hu did not care. He did not understand the sword vein, so he thought it was normal. It was nothing more than moving the flying sword from the sword case into the body. However, Qin Xian was shocked. The 3 pristine ones were the Dharma cultivators who understood swordsmen the best. They knew how difficult it was for an external sword to move the flying sword from the sword case into the body. In the tens of thousands of years of history of the external sword, they had never stopped trying to do so, but they had never seen any results. Now that this fellow heard that the upper realm of Zhou Xian was filled with sword plate orthodoxy, he moved the flying sword just like that. For such a person, it was not unreasonable for the sects to want to kill him. However, he also knew that at least in the upper realm of Zhou Xian, the 3 of them were a single entity. They needed to support each other, not tear each other down. He was not a Taiqing cultivator. As the most outstanding Jin Dan in the 5 rings of the Shangqing sect, he had his own pride. He might not be inferior to them. Moreover, he could also see that Lu Xiaoyi's talent in swordsmanship was indeed heaven-defying. However, in terms of cultivation, he was also trash. This was where his advantage lay. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.